Our story begins in the middle of the forest, where a long-haired, well-dressed boy in a white outfit is walking. He is meeting a girl wearing a pink dress, and he smiles at her. The girl is extremely excited to see him, saying that he has really come. The boy's name is Ganq, and at that, the boy approaches the girl, who is called Yahello, saying that after today, the cold poison of the 3 yin that are in her body can be completely removed. He tells her this with a lot of enthusiasm, as if it were an event he had been waiting to happen for a long time, and he also tells her that at that moment she could become a genius admired by everyone, and Yahello, with a smile on her face, asks Ganq if he is serious, at which point he answers the girl by saying that it is true, of course, because he would never lie to her. Ganq is the young master of the Chu family, one of the 4 great families of the city of Tianshui. He had awakened the bloodline of the 9 yang, and his talent is something extraordinary, but unfortunately, in the last 3 years, his cultivation hasn't progressed at all, and everyone was making fun of him for falling from grace, but he simply doesn't care at all. After all, this is his own choice. To save his childhood friend, Lin Tianyao, the beloved daughter of the head of the Liu family, one of the 4 great families of the city of Tianshu, until Yahello, who was hugging him, apologizes to Ganq, and her face completely flushed with embarrassment. She comments that it's all her fault that everyone makes fun of Ganq, and hearing Yahello say that, he calls her a silly girl, and with a smile and a lot of kindness, he asks the girl why she's saying that. He goes on to say that the cold poison produced by the 3 awakened yin meridians can only be solved by the life essence of his 9 yang bloodline, and he asks the young girl how he could stand by and watch her simply die with his own eyes, and the girl, hearing him say it, is quite happy, and Ganq continues, saying that when she feels better and recovers, he will immediately go to her father to ask him for her hand in marriage. He continues talking to the young Yahello, revealing that the long-awaited recruitment competition for the prestigious Xuanjian sect will soon take place in a month's time. He expresses his plans and hopes, saying enthusiastically that after joining the sect together, they will be able to become what he calls a divine couple, united in a life full of happiness and without worries, living a romance that promises to be strong and eternal. After hearing these words and noticing the seriousness in his tone of voice, Yahello replies calmly, saying that everything depends only on him and his determination to achieve these goals. However, when mentioning the years that have passed, she comments that over the course of these 3 years, upon hearing this, he reassures her with a slight smile, asking her not to be so formal in her words and reminding her that there is no need to use such polite language with him, as they are friends, and he wants her to feel at ease in his presence. Then, realizing that night is advancing and darkness is beginning to cover the sky, he tells Yahello that it's getting late and that it's the ideal time to remove the last trace of cold poison that still resides in his body. With a serene and confident air, he invites her to sit next to him. They both position themselves on the ground, assuming a meditation posture. He closes his eyes, channeling his energy and concentration into the task, and, after a few moments, he feels his own Kai begin to circulate more intensely. His face reflects a deep focus, and, with precise, smooth movements, he raises his vital energy, making it flow like a river towards the center of his hands. The concentration is so intense that he begins to tremble slightly, and a drop of blood appears on the tip of his index finger, reflecting the sacrifice of his own vital essence, which he will use to purify Yahello's body. With a careful touch, he places the small drop of blood exactly in the middle of her forehead. He knows that the essence of his blood carries with it the cultivation and strength of a warrior. It is something precious and irreplaceable. Every time he sacrifices a little of his blood essence, he feels the pain and wear and tear it causes, remembering his master's words about the risks of losing this vital energy. However, he does so with conviction, believing that Yahello's well-being justifies any sacrifice on his part. After completing the procedure, he feels fatigue invade his body, his muscles heavy and his breathing a little more difficult. Yet he also perceives a feeling of relief and accomplishment, as he now believes that the cold poison that had been tormenting her has finally been neutralized and no longer poses a threat. Suddenly, Yahello began to glow with an intense golden light, emanating a warm and powerful aura. He watched the transformation with wide eyes and, feeling a contagious joy, smiled from ear to ear with satisfaction. He commented that she had finally managed to get rid of that cold poison that had been debilitating her, and he felt pride rise within him as he saw the success of the purification. She, still in the midst of the energy she was exhaling, replied with a smile and confirmed that yes, she she had finally managed to overcome the poison curse. But at that moment, something strange seemed to manifest itself. Yaora's gaze changed, taking on an enigmatic and distant expression, which left Ganq confused and apprehensive. He watched her, perplexed, calling her name in search of an explanation for this sudden change in behavior. However, she stares at him coldly, and her voice sounds different, devoid of the affection she used to show. With an icy tone, she says that now that everything has come to an end, he could die. The words echo like a cruel sentence, and Ganq feels a chill run through his body, a cold sweat dripping down his forehead as he tries to understand what is going on. He asks Yaor if it is all just a bad joke, something she is doing to test his reaction, but without showing a shred of hesitation, she replies, saying that there is someone she really loves, someone who truly occupies her heart. With contempt, she explains that if it weren't for the treatment for the poison, she would never stoop so low as to endure his presence. Faced with these cruel words, Ganq is in a state of shock, unable to process the betrayal she has just revealed. He realizes, with a deep pain, that everything he had done for her, all the sacrifices and dedication of years, had been in vain. Yaor looks at him with an expression of disdain, as if his every kind gesture had no value. Ganq, now wounded not only in his body, but also in his soul, feels betrayed, devastated by the revelation that Yaor never really cared about him, and, in that moment of weakness, he realizes that his trust and dedication had been completely manipulated. She also asks how many times he had offended her in the last 3 years. Even if she were cut into 10,000 knives and died 1,000 times, it wouldn't relieve the hatred that was inside her heart, and the protagonist, who had become a little weak for the sake of helping her, answers Yaor by saying that then, it was all just a conspiracy, and for 3 years, he had paid tirelessly with his blood and essence and for her, and yet, in her eyes, it was worth nothing. And Yaor, being quite cold, with a completely somber tone, affirms what the boy has just said, saying that it's exactly that. It was all just a big conspiracy. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sacrificed his own blood essence to heal her, and at that, Ganq asks if that's it, and she wants him to die now, and at that, he also asks what happens if she completely masters the 3 absolute yin meridians, even if he's seriously injured at that moment. He doesn't care, and he says that she had underestimated him, because the true level of Kai cultivation is far beyond hers, a mere stage 5 of body refinement can reach, until someone appears in the middle of the forest, showing his silhouette and asks the protagonist if he includes him. It was also a man with long hair and wearing a purple suit. He is the second young master. He is called Aoyang Yuan. He's the second young master of the city of Tianshui, and Yaor, on seeing the second young master, simply opens a big smile and goes over to him, while the protagonist thinks that she was trusting someone powerful, and that's why she felt bold enough to go against him, and he can't believe it. He's no match for the second young master, and he needed to escape at that moment. But the second young master simply approaches Ganq asking if he wants to run, but it's too late, preparing an attack with his hands on fire at that moment, and hitting the protagonist with everything. Ganq thinks that Yuan is actually a level 6 Kai master, and Yuan comments that this bloodline on Ganq's body that he says is from a humble peasant is really a big waste. While the protagonist is lying on the ground, Yuan puts his hand on his torso and starts a skill that makes a red aura appear, and the young protagonist tries to hold his hand, and at the same time, he thinks how dare Aoyang Yuan practice such forbidden techniques, and Aoyang Yuan uses the technique called casting, and then he starts laughing a lot, saying that the bloodline of the 9 young finally belongs to him, and at that, he starts exhaling a lot of energy, and then he looks at Yaor and tells her that he's going to give all of Chu Ganq's cultivation to her, making the girl completely excited about this news, and he tells her to work hard on her cultivation, because in a month's time there will be the Mystic Sword Sect's recruitment contest. She was all smiles as he passed the crop to her, exuding a strong energy that echoed throughout the place, and with a smile on her face, she thanked the young second master, and while she was very happy, the protagonist was very angry, saying that the 2 shameless scoundrels, he wasn't going to let them rest easy like that. Even if he became a ghost, he was going to do something. Aoyang Yuan, watching the scene unfold coolly, turns his calculating gaze on Yaor and calmly asks what she plans to do with Ganq, showing a discreet but deep interest in his partner's intention. Ganq, sensing the threatening and insensitive tone of both of them, gets up with difficulty, still weak, but deeply indignant and full of determination. He faces Yaor with a look full of resentment, making it clear that he will not give in without first expressing his fury and indignation confrontation. Ganq, still wounded and with his voice lacerated by pain and anger, threatens that if he dies there, the powerful and influential Chu family will certainly not let Yahello escape unscathed. He mentions that the great elder of the Chu family is a ruthless and determined figure, and will certainly take it upon himself to avenge Ganq's death, going after her wherever she is. Hearing this, Yahello lets out a contemptuous smile, clearly unperturbed by the protagonist's words. She looks at him coldly and indifferently, as if his threat was insignificant, and asks in an ironic tone who he thinks had planned that meeting in advance and how his health could benefit the cure of her illness. In a cutting tone, she continues, saying that Ganq really believed that he was away from his family and out of his responsibilities for no reason. She explains that there are no guards from his house or his family to protect him, because those he thought were allies were actually plotting against him. She then reveals that the great elder of the Chu family himself wishes for his death even more intensely than she does. Her face contorts into a cruel smile as she adds that, in fact, the elder already considers him to be a dead man, longing for the position of young master of the Chu family to pass to someone else, someone more obedient and manipulable. Ganq, stunned, feels a mixture of horror and betrayal grow inside him. He realizes, with a growing pain in his chest, that from the moment he awakened his 9 young bloodline, he was entangled in a carefully contrived trap. Every move he has made in recent times was, unbeknownst to him, part of a larger scheme, planned from the start. Before he can react or respond, the young woman, with an evil glint in her eye, unleashes an overwhelming blow, hitting him with all her strength. The impact of the attack is so brutal that he is thrown backwards, feeling his body crash hard into the ground as a large amount of blood drips from his mouth. The metallic and bitter taste of the blood mixing with the despair and hatred growing inside him. Feeling increasingly weak and powerless, he hears Yahello's footsteps approaching, and when she reaches his side, she leans over and whispers in his ear, in a cold and cruel tone, that killing him in one go would be too easy, and that he didn't deserve such mercy. Ganq feels the weight of her words, but before he can react, he realizes that his vision is beginning to darken, a veil of darkness enveloping his consciousness. He struggles to stay awake, but his body doesn't respond. He feels his strength slipping away little by little, until everything around him disappears into a complete blackness. While his mind wanders between unconsciousness and pain, Yahello's words echo in his mind, reinforcing the cruel sentence she has imposed on him. She wants him to feel the agony of falling from the heights of his achievements into the abyss of despair, so that he experiences suffering that surpasses even death. Suddenly, Ganq finds himself in a vast and empty space, a dark and lonely universe that seems to stretch endlessly around him. He realizes that his body is floating there, lost and isolated. A sense of panic overtakes him as he realizes that his Danshan is completely destroyed. The energy that once fed his cultivation and his 9 young bloodline has disappeared, leaving him in a state of absolute emptiness and weakness. He feels like an empty shell, devoid of any power or purpose, and a wave of bitterness and hatred begins to flood his heart. He wonders, desolate, what is now the difference between him and an ordinary person, devoid of any ability or value? A despairing thought arises in his mind. If he is now nothing more than garbage, stripped of all his strength, perhaps it would be better to be dead. However, as these dark thoughts envelop him, he notices a spark of determination rising in his chest, something that prevents him from giving up completely. He feels a warmth inside, a small flame of life and struggle that resists the darkness. Resolute, he tells himself that, as long as there is a remnant of life in his body, he must not give in to giving up. A fierce will grows inside him, and he stands up, feeling anger and a thirst for revenge take hold of his soul. He declares, with all his might, that he will seek his revenge, that he will fight against those who betrayed him, even if he has to face hell itself to do it. At that moment, he hears a series of voices around him, whispering like echoes of the universe. They talk about deep and mystical concepts, an inflexible will, the imminent opening of the divine tower, the need to dismantle in order to rebuild, and even something about refining the supreme blood and the divine technique of the celestial emperor. They mention the mysterious Tao of primordial chaos, something that seems to be beyond any mortal power. Hearing these words, Ganq feels a wave of hope and a new power stir within him. He realizes that even though he is devoid of his former strength, there is still a new possibility of achieving power, a mystical path that reveals itself as a last chance to rebuild his life and seek the justice and revenge he so desperately desires. This causes a tremendous headache for Ganq until he realizes something that makes him wide wide-eyed. There was a kind of tower right in front of him that was really immense, and he wonders what it is. It was the Supreme Tower of Chaos, technique of the Celestial Emperor of Chaos. He sits and thinks that this opportunity must not be missed, and he must master that technique as quickly as he can. At this, he concentrates, until a pink dragon begins to appear around him, and suddenly, an energy takes over his body, to the point of even making his eyes shine. His cultivation has been improved, and his body refinement has reached stage 3. He stands up very excited, and with a smile on his face, he comments that he has done in an hour what most people take more than 10 years, going from having his cultivation completely destroyed to reaching level 3 of body refinement. And he thinks this is a good thing, telling himself that now he's going to settle the score with those two shameless bastards, and he's sure to make them kneel down and beg for his mercy. But when he starts walking, he just falls flat on his face, and there, completely bruised, he thinks he's been blinded by anger, and he's acted recklessly. Then the morning comes, and the young protagonist wakes up in a room, and then he thinks, and at the same time wonders what room he is in, until he hears a noise outside, and he feels absurd despair. He goes to the door and opens it wide, and he witnesses some boys oppressing a girl, asking her if she is really acting like an adult woman. As the young woman lay on the ground, completely bruised and powerless, she silently lamented the distressing situation she was in, her thoughts immersed in the difficulties she had been through, reflecting on everything she had done for Chu Jiankyu. Not only had she secretly carried him back at a time when he was seriously injured, but she had also dared to steal medicine, defying even her own limits to help him. She knew that her actions could bring consequences, but her love and devotion for him made her take these actions. However, the pain of her injuries and the precarious situation she was in seemed to be the price she would have to pay for her loyalty. At that moment, a man with a cruel and ruthless attitude approached. Looking at her with disdain, he, with a cold expression and without any trace of compassion, ordered her to quickly hand over the medicine she had stolen. Otherwise, he would kill her right there. Without hesitation, without another word, he kicked the young woman hard, as if she were a simple discarded drink can, the poor girl's pain only increasing by the moment. The man, with an insensitive look, summoned her once again, saying that he wanted to see how long she could hold out before giving in. He was clearly enjoying her suffering, without realizing the gravity of his own actions. The young protagonist, Jiankyu, who was watching the scene from afar, was overcome by a feeling of anger and despair. He could no longer allow such an injustice to happen in front of him. With a dark and threatening expression, he approached and with a serious and fury-laden tone, ordered the man to immediately stop oppressing the young girl. A kind of purple energy began to emanate from his body, radiating everywhere, creating a pressure in the environment that seemed to threaten to crush everything around him. This energy was a manifestation of his own anger and power, and it seemed to be enough to make it clear that Jiankyu would no longer allow anyone to be mistreated like this. The man in yellow clothes, upon realizing Jiankyu's presence and his powerful aura, looked at him with a disdainful countenance, as if the young master was no longer a threat. With an arrogant smile, he questioned Jiankyu, asking if he was trying to be rebellious and challenging his authority. He said that day, he would teach that girl a good lesson, something that would make her learn to respect the rules and understand her place. Jiankyu, for his part, replied firmly, making it clear that it wasn't his job to punish or control the people around the young master. That kind of behavior wasn't his responsibility, and he wouldn't hesitate to interfere whenever he saw something so wrong going on. The man in yellow clothes, visibly surprised by Jiankyu's audacity, began to laugh contemptuously, as if the young master had no idea of his own place. He then, with an arrogant tone, stated that, in a few days, Jiankyu would no longer be the young master of the Chu family. He questioned, provoking anyone who dared to oppose the decision of the Chu family's Council of Elders, insinuating that the change of leadership was already underway and that Jiankyu was about to be stripped of his position. With a parchment in his hands, the man continued, revealing that the great elder had decided to hold an internal competition in the clan in 10 days to re-elect the position of young master. He was implying that, contrary to what Jiankyu thought, change was about to happen and that his position was about to be taken by another. The young protagonist, listening to those words carefully, maintained his outward calm while his heart boiled inside. He knew that the Grand Elder was an important figure, but he internally questioned the power and legitimacy of his actions. In his response, Jiankyu challenged the man's view, saying that the Grand Elder was merely a member of the main branch of the Chu family without the necessary authority to make such radical decisions. He then asked a direct question, asking if he wanted to be the patriarch of the Chu family, indicating that, for him, the leadership of the family could not simply be taken in any way, let alone by such unprepared people. The yellow-robed boy, visibly irritated by the question, replied to Ganq, stating that the patriarch had been missing for 3 years. He explained that, according to the rules of the Chu family, the Grand Elder, being the oldest and most experienced member, had taken charge during this period of the patriarch's absence. He further questioned how someone like Ganq could understand the complexities of power within the Chu family, implying that the young master didn't have the necessary qualities to occupy the position he held. Ganq, already visibly irritated by the man's attitude, didn't hesitate to respond with a tone full of disdain, stating that the Great Elder, by allying himself with Liu Tianyao, had stolen his 9 young bloodline, and that this treacherous act was what had led him to the situation he found himself in. He then questioned how this person, who had done so many wrong things, should be treated according to the family rules. His indignation was clear, and he was unwilling to accept that the Great Elder's actions should be treated as something normal or acceptable. The boy in the yellow clothes, surprised by Ganq's words, found himself momentarily at a loss for answers, yet he quickly recovered and, with a cynical smile, said that Ganq shouldn't spread alarming rumors. He put the blame on Ganq, claiming that he was responsible for his own misfortune, since it was his own incompetence and naivety that had led him to be tricked by a woman. He suggested that the young master shouldn't blame others for his own downfall. Meanwhile, Ganq, without wasting any time, approached the young girl who was still lying on the ground, her body full of wounds and an expression of suffering. He crouched down beside her, watching with concern, but also with a growing determination. He knew that he couldn't allow any more suffering to be imposed on her, and that the injustice needed to be put right, once and for all. He says that even if the boy's words are true, before the clan competition begins, he is still the young master of the Chu family, and at that, he crouches down and tries to support the girl, and then, he says to the boy in the yellow dress that he is now the young master of the Chu family. As the young master of the Chu family, he orders the boy to kneel down and apologize to his maid. The girl's name is Ruhua, and then, one of the boys who was present at the time asks Ganq, in this world, where there is a master kneeling down to a servant, she also asks him if he doesn't think that's a bit too arrogant, at which point Ruhua looks at her young master and, trembling a lot, tells him that he's still injured and provoking that guy wouldn't be a good idea at the moment. And Ganq, being very kind to the girl, tells her that he's fine and she shouldn't worry about it. And while the two of them are talking, the boy doesn't like it one bit, squeezing her hand very tightly due to the stress. At this, he wonders if an uncultivated waste still dares to be so arrogant, and then he quickly prepares a blow with his fist, heading towards the protagonist, saying that today, the young master will surely make him kneel on the ground and call him grandfather. But Ganq, with a serene look and that strong aura, simply blocks the boy's attack with his own fist, making a clash with the other boy's fist. But the impact of this shock is so great that it sends the boy flying, and at that, the boy is completely perplexed at that moment. Frustrated, he thinks, and at the same time wonders if Ganq hadn't lost what cultivation he had, and wonders what the hell was going on now. And at that, the young master, Ganq, asks the boy if he is going to kneel voluntarily, or does he want the young master to simply break his legs so that he kneels anyway to ask the girl for forgiveness. But he asks this question with a completely somber tone, something that makes that boy's colleagues get scared, and one of them asks how this is happening. After all, the young master had lost his cultivation, but now, the question remains if he still has cultivation, and the boy next to him says that it's over. If he knew, he wouldn't have followed young Master Chu He, and he gets completely angry, saying that at most, Ganq is only at level 3 of body refinement now, and according to him, it's as if he's already dead, and at the same time, he thinks he's at the 4th level of body refinement, and he'll do whatever it takes to get his face back today. Enraged, feeling challenged in an unbearable way, he concentrates all his energy and decides to use a devastating technique that he has mastered, the spirit-breaking fist. He invokes this skill with impressive intensity, releasing such overwhelming spiritual energy that his friends around him are completely startled. One of them, with a pale face and wide eyes, can barely contain his surprise at seeing the aura emanating from his body, commenting in disbelief that the spiritual force he is radiating is extremely powerful, almost palpable. His colleagues exchange apprehensive glances. Realizing what is about to happen, they wonder how Ganq could withstand such a strong devastating blow. Determined, he moves forward to attack Ganq, preparing to deliver a blow that he believes will be able to defeat his opponent once and for all. However, once again, Ganq remains almost motionless, with a cold and defiant stance. He waits until the last moment and then, with a swift and precise movement, throws a punch with such power that his body is propelled out of control, spinning in the air like a spinning top. The force of the impact is so intense that he flies a few meters before colliding violently with the wall. As he hits the structure with all his might, the sound echoes around the room, leaving everyone present stunned. His colleagues, witnessing the scene, are in a state of complete shock. They can't believe what they have just seen. The image of he being thrown like a rag doll to the other side of the site contradicts everything they knew about Ganq. How can a young man who, until recently, had completely lost his cultivation, display such overwhelming strength and dominate an opponent who is at the 4th stage of body refinement? The group tries to process what is happening, but the surprise paralyzes them. One of his friends desperately shouts for the young master, asking if he's alright, unsure of how to react. He, now a little wounded and humiliated, gets up with difficulty, visibly shaken by Ganq's unexpected power. With a frustrated countenance and a confused mind, he reflects, perplexed, on how Ganq, who is still officially at the 3rd stage of body refinement, could defeat him so humiliatingly and with such ease. He tries to understand what could explain that sudden and superior force. In the midst of his confused thoughts, he is supported by his companions, who help him up while he looks furiously at Ganq, promising revenge. Furious and determined, he tells Ganq that, by reporting everything to the Great Elder, the young master of the Chu family will certainly not go unpunished. He promises that Ganq will have his pride shattered very soon, and that those moments of arrogance will not last. At that moment, Ruhua, an observant and admiring young woman, approaches Ganq, referring to him as the young master. She is completely impressed by what she has just seen, commenting that, even after facing a fierce fight and suffering injuries, Ganq was still able to defeat Chu He in an overwhelming way, something she considers incredible. Her eyes shining with admiration as she observes the young man, as if she were contemplating a legendary hero. The way Ruhua looks at Ganq makes it clear how much she is admired and inspired by his strength and determination. The young protagonist, hearing Ruhua's praise, smiles with satisfaction. Feeling excited by the recognition, he was full of enthusiasm and hope for the possibilities of what the future would hold. Although he knew that greater challenges were yet to come, that moment of victory gave him the strength and confidence to face whatever came. While he was talking to Ruhua, feeling refreshed and confident, a boy with black and purple hair was watching Ganq intently from a distance. Hidden in the shadows, he was studying the young protagonist with a penetrating gaze, as if he was planning something or analyzing his every move. It was a day with clear blue skies, and later in the day, the protagonist was inside his house, taking a moment to train. Their surroundings were simple but welcoming. There were a few chairs, and a porcelain kettle rested on top of a polished wooden chest of drawers, while Ganq was enjoying that moment of tranquility, immersed in his own thoughts. A loud and sudden bang resounded outside, and the whole house shook as if an earthquake had hit it. At that moment, Ganq realizes something that makes him even more astonished. He had finally reached the 4th stage of body refinement. He is incredibly surprised to feel that his body is much stronger and more energized. He thinks to himself, with a mixture of amazement and satisfaction, that this could only be the result of the 50 body tempering pills he has recently consumed. This unexpected advance gives him a sense of security and makes him reflect on how much more prepared he is to face opponents like Chu He, who, although still strong, now seem to be far from his current level. However, Ganq recognizes that, despite his progress, he is still far from recovering all the power he possessed before losing his cultivation. In a careful estimate, he calculates that, to return to the strength he previously held, he would need at least another 6 months of intense training and dedication. However, the prospect doesn't discourage him. On the contrary, he feels even more motivated to keep going, eager to find out how far his new power could take him. So he shakes the bag to drop more pills, but it seems he's taken all he has, until Ruhua arrives, telling her young master that it's time to eat. But what she sees simply startles her. The chairs are all fallen on the floor. It's a mess, and the protagonist, with a smile on his face, tells her not to worry about it now and asks them to go to the pill pavilion first. And she thinks that that after the young master taught Chu he a lesson, he isolated himself to cultivate for just an hour or two, and then he advanced a level. This speed is simply challenging. It's something beyond the limit of the sky for her. And then, in a very beautiful building, a person was reporting what he had seen, and then whoever was listening ended up asking if he hadn't heard wrong, and if Ganq had really defeated he. And at that, the visibly frightened boy, because he didn't want to come off as a person who is getting the facts wrong, says that it's the absolute truth. It had just happened, and the news ended up spreading throughout the Chu family, and they said that the young master Chu he was broken without any effort. They believe that Ganq has some kind of secret technique. He hasn't lost himself completely. He's just fallen to a lower level. At this, the white-bearded old man who was listening to the report comments that if Chu Ganq really did turn into a piece of garbage, the Pill Pavilion would naturally side with the Great Elder without hesitation. But he is still hiding the strength he possesses, and so the old man finds it hard to tell, until Ruhua arrives with Ganq by her side and announces that the young master has arrived and asks where the Pavilion Elder is. He also asked why he hadn't come to greet the young master Ganq quickly, at which point the old man said that there was Ganq and asked what had brought the young master to the Pill Pavilion, at which point he stared at Ganq, thinking that judging by Chu Ganq's aura, he was in fact only at the refined body level, at which point the protagonist said that he, the young master, had come to collect the month's quota of pills. And while he was saying that, the old man was still thinking that compared to before, this was a world of difference, and he wondered what he could accomplish now and then. The old man, hearing the young protagonist's request, asked his subordinates to go quickly and get the pills, because they shouldn't keep the young master waiting. But at the same moment that he said that, he gave a wink, as if he had something under his breath. The subordinate, with a satisfied smile on his face, immediately replies that he has clearly understood the orders, making it clear that he is willing to comply promptly with the young master's request. He then walks away quickly and, a short time later, returns carrying a small bottle in his hands, which he offers to the young master with the utmost reverence. Ganq looks at the bottle and, with an intrigued look, asks if there are really only 6 body-tempering pills in there, wondering why the quantity and the choice of pills in particular. The young master senses that there is something unusual about the situation, so he turns to the old man and tries to understand what the real meaning is of being given just these pills, when normally he would receive other, more advanced resources. Ruhua, who was standing next to him and also observing the scene, intervenes, expressing with a serious tone that the portion destined for the young master has always been 3 Kai collection pills, and that there is a huge difference in the effects between the two. According to her, the efficacy of Kai collection pills is 10 times greater than that of body tempering pills, showing that the latter are much less powerful. Ruhua, indignant, asks the elder directly what he is really trying to do by offering Ganq resources of a lower quality than what he, as a young master, has always been entitled to. The elder, maintaining a serene expression, replies in a way that tries to reassure spirits, stating that the young master had misinterpreted him. He explains that the Pill Pavilion's resource allocations have always been made taking into account the cultivation level of each of the disciples and family members, and in Ganq's previous position, at the first level of the true Kai realm, he was naturally deserving of the Kai collection pills due to the high level of power he possessed. However, the elder points out that the situation now is completely different. Ganq listens attentively to the elder's every word, processing the implications that these changes would bring for his own development and power within the sect. The protagonist, immersed in his own thoughts, concludes that if everything had followed the usual course, he would have received those 3 Kai collection pills, which would allow him to advance directly to the 5th level of body refinement, achieving significant progress in his cultivation. But now, faced with the new reality, Ganq realizes that he may need to look for an alternative way to obtain these pills, since access to the resources that were once guaranteed to him now seems uncertain. Reflecting on this, and trying to contain the frustration that was beginning to set in, he decides not to prolong the conversation any further. With a tone of determination, the young master turns to Ruhua and suggests that they leave the place immediately, demonstrating that he is not willing to accept this disregard. As she walks alongside Ganq, Ruhua can't help but glance discreetly behind her, observing the other members of the sect and those who seem to despise him. She thinks to herself that although they underestimate him now and make fun of his condition, they will all regret it bitterly in the future when the young master's true strength and determination emerge. In the protagonist's thoughts, worry mixes with a sense of urgency, as he is fully aware that the Great Elder's faction is about to make a decisive move. The situation he finds himself in requires him to increase his cultivation as quickly as he can, to be prepared and up to the next challenges that will inevitably come. Determined to seek out new resources and enhance his power, he heads for a place that holds a special mystique, an imposing tower, surrounded by a dark aura that seems to reverberate throughout the surrounding area. As he looks up at the tower, Ganq reflects on the role this place has played in his journey so far. Even though his meridians had been severed and his dantian destroyed, it was with the help of the enigmatic Supreme Tower of Chaos that he was able to achieve rebirth and rebuild the foundations of his power. Every step he took up to that point was shaped by the energies of this place, and now, as he approaches the staircase that would take him to another level, he feels a wave of anticipation, imagining the new opportunities that could be hidden behind that mysterious door. With his heart beating fast and his mind full of questions, he finally decides to open the door of the tower, and is immediately surprised by an explosion of energy of an intense yellow tone that fills the environment around him. Ganq observes, fascinated, the energy concentration that permeates the place, which seems to emanate an indescribable force. He realizes that this place is not ordinary, but a special space where an ancient and powerful heritage resides. The matrix of origin of myriad path. The sight is so grandiose that it leaves him almost speechless, and he feels that the power of this place is vast and untapped. As he observes his surroundings, Ganq notices 4 items floating in the matrix, each emanating a distinct and powerful energy. On closer inspection, he recognizes that they are legendary talismans. There was the fire talisman, radiating a scorching force; the water talisman, whose energy flows smoothly and steadily; the wind talisman, light and agile, representing the swiftness of the winds; and finally the speed talisman, with an almost electric energy, as if it could grant its bearer superhuman speed. Overcome with excitement, Ganq reflects on the immense potential that these talismans represent, the possibility of claiming these artifacts for himself, absorbing their energies and expanding his abilities to levels he never imagined he could reach makes his heart beat faster. He understands that each of these talismans has the power to transform his path, making him stronger and able to face any adversary that crosses his path. He's surprised, thinking that talisman arrays are the most profound techniques on the Tenwu continent, and the Myriad Path Origin Talisman Array is the pinnacle of all talisman arrays in the world. And at that, one of the cards that was flying in that great concentration of energy simply falls right into the protagonist's hands, and at that, he thinks and at the same time wonders if that is a talisman formation. And then he sits down and thinks that if he manages to master that talisman array, in the future, no matter what kind of pill he wants, he won't have to worry about it. And then he begins to concentrate with his hands together, and then a blue energy begins to exude, holding the cards as if they were wrapped in bubbles, and suddenly, the card simply begins to burn in a blue flame, and the protagonist throws himself to the ground, thinking that finally, it's done. And also, he thinks that the matrix of the pill talisman is something extremely difficult to master. If it wasn't for his mastery of the technique of the Celestial Emperor of Chaos, it could have taken him decades to fully understand, and then, he only needs the materials to refine the body-tempering pills. And then, in the city, people were circulating in the streets, while one of the boys, with a slightly curious countenance, held up one of the cards that Ganq had shown him. He looked at it with a serious expression, as if trying to understand if there was any truth in it. However, his skeptical expression soon turned to disdain, especially when he saw that Ganq, apparently downcast, seemed almost on the verge of tears, driven by frustration at the disbelief. Noticing Ganq's reaction, the young man approached with a cynical smile, exuding an air of superiority, and began to ask questions ironically and disdainfully. He expressed a tone of disbelief when he questioned the announced increase of 100% that the letter supposedly offered, treating it as a proposal so absurd that no one in their right mind could take it seriously. The young man, who wore yellow clothes and had a look marked by obvious arrogance, commented with contempt that, to him, it was simply inconceivable that anyone could actually believe such promises. He mocked the situation, taking the opportunity to pin Ganq with malicious words. Then, with a disdainful smile, he commented that he would never have imagined that he, who had once been considered the young master of the Chu family and once the #1 genius in Tianshui City, would have fallen so far as to stoop to such underhanded and shameful tricks. For him, it was pathetic to see Ganq in this state, trying to convince people with what he thought was a farce. As he took a closer look at the boy, Ganq soon realized that this was Liu Gaoyang, Liu Tianyao's younger brother, the woman he had always considered to be treacherous and dangerous. The connection between them only increased the resentment and disgust Ganq felt at being the target of so much hostility. Around Liu Gaoyang, there were other young people, all laughing and mocking, echoing the boy's words with a tone of derision. With their gazes fixed on Ganq, they began to make spiteful comments, claiming that he no longer even had the ability to cultivate, and yet he was there claiming to have designed a talisman with 100% increase in power, which was, in their view, a blatant lie. One of the young men stood out among the rest and, in a provocative tone, reinforced the idea that no one would ever believe such an obvious fake. He said that it was ridiculous that Ganq was even trying to deceive people, claiming that the Chu family's young master was nothing more than a desperate fool. Another of the young men then went on to say that his own young master was a renowned talisman master in Tianshui, and therefore had enough knowledge to spot fakes and imposters at a glance. He wryly questioned how Ganq dared to try to sell fake talismans right under their noses, calling him arrogant for even thinking he could fool them. While these nasty comments were being said, Liu Gaoyang kept a satisfied smile on his face, clearly enjoying every word he heard. Liu Gaoyang's inflated ego, which already considered Ganq as someone insignificant, seemed to grow even more, fueled by the humiliations his friends uttered against the young master of the Chu family. For him, Ganq was nothing more than an irrelevant obstacle in his path, someone who now looked more like a pathetic figure trying to cling to anything to save a little of his dignity. Liu Gaoyang, taking advantage of the situation, spoke directly to Ganq again, with a tone of even more obvious provocation and sarcasm. He insinuated that, before thinking about reacting, it would be better for Ganq if he revealed the truth about that letter and abandoned his supposed tricks. Otherwise, he wondered if Ganq really believed he could escape the consequences. Liu Gaoyang threatened, saying that he could easily force Ganq to kneel down and bang his head on the ground a few times if he didn't cooperate, and, in a tone of false generosity, added that perhaps, out of an act of mercy, he would even consider rewarding him with some spirit stones. These stones, which were precious items, were offered as if they were alms, a favor granted for Liu Gaoyang's kindness, further emphasizing the tone of superiority and contempt in his words. Ganq, however, listened attentively to every word, without losing his composure. Although he felt a growing anger building up in his heart, he knew that those young men were just trying to humiliate him, but he wasn't willing to give in. Instead, with a serious and defiant expression, he replied to the boys, saying that they were nothing more than a bunch of mad dogs, barking senselessly. With a sharp tone, he ordered them, if they had any wits about them, to get out of there immediately, because he, as the true young master, did not wish to be disturbed while he was conducting his business. His posture was firm, and his words showed that he was not afraid to confront those who tried to trample on him. When he heard Ganq's reply, Liu Gaoyang was completely beside himself. He couldn't believe that Ganq, in such an unfavorable position, would dare to call him a mad dog. His expression of surprise soon turned to fury, and he, filled with rage, stared at Ganq, trying to process what he had just heard. For Liu Gaoyang, being compared to a dog was the height of offense, especially coming from someone he considered inferior and insignificant. He looked at Ganq as if he were in front of a piece of trash, someone he didn't even think deserved to be there, and began to think about how he would repay the insult he had just received, at which point he opened his fan and went towards Ganq, saying that he was courting the boy's death. However, the young protagonist, with a coldness in his gaze, simply dodges the boy's attack and hits his arm with all his might, causing Liu Gaoyang's arm to break into several pieces, leaving him completely stunned, witnessing with his own skin and bones, literally, what the protagonist is capable of. Due to the pain, he simply gives a scream that echoes throughout the room, and he throws himself to the ground. His subordinates are completely confused, wondering what is going on there, and at that, he screams, saying that his arm is hurting a lot, and at that, the other subordinate comments that they had said that Ganq had been broken and lost all the cultivation he had. That is, they are all a bunch of cowards. They wanted to beat the protagonist through weakness. And then, very angrily, Liu Gaoyang looks directly at the protagonist and asks him what he wants to do after all, and with a dark tone in his voice. The young protagonist tells Gaoyang that his sister owes him a very bloody debt, and today, first of all, he's going to earn some interest from them, leaving Gaoyang completely perplexed after having having said that, until someone shouts for them to stop, launching a skill that throws a very powerful energy towards the young protagonist, who just dodges without difficulty. The person responsible for the attack is called Liang Jushin, the elder of the Talisman Pavilion's law enforcement, and the Gaoyang who until a few minutes ago was covered by pride and his inflated ego, was now on the ground. Seeing Jushin there, he goes into despair, asking the elder for help, saying that Chu Jiankyu had simply gone mad and he wanted to kill him, and at that, Liang Jushin asks Jiankyu if he has any last words, and after having asked him that, the young protagonist asks the elder Liang why he's attacking him without understanding the situation, and the elder asks what he meant by not understanding the situation, and asks the protagonist how he dares to say that he didn't understand the situation when he made a move in the territory of the Myriad Weapons Trading Company. And the protagonist looks at the boy next to him and asks him if he could ask him a question. So he asks him who made the first move and also asks him if he saw it clearly, at which point the boy comments that it was the young master of the Liu family who made the first move, because everyone who was present at that moment saw it, at which point Liang turns back and asks if what that boy said was true. At this, one of the men standing near him replied that yes, he had asked several junior brothers who had been watching for a while and they had all said the same thing, and at this, with a very cold and somber tone, Liang said to Liu Gaoyang, as a disciple of the Talisman Pavilion, breaking the law is an even greater crime for him, and Gaoyang is shocked to hear this and regrets it, thinking that in the end, Jiankyu was deliberately provoking him, and that he was the one who was taking the piss instead of leaving straight away. And he quickly gets up from the ground. In a desperate attempt not to lose out completely, he tells the elder that he is innocent and Chu Jiankyu was there, simply wanting to do illegal business, selling fake talismans, and he couldn't help but act, and at that, Liang asks about selling fake talismans, as this is a serious crime punishable by death, and the protagonist quite calmly says that in fact, Gaoyang didn't even look at the talismans he was trading, and then he asks how he can be sure that they're fake, until someone shouts out that a talisman increases strength by 100%, and also asks if Jiankyu really thinks he deserves to have such a thing, and the person who asked him that is the elder of the talisman's pavilion, Chang Heochin, at which point Gaoyang shouts out, calling for his master, and Heochin holds his shoulders, telling Gaoyang not to worry, for his master will surely seek justice for his apprentice, and he says that in the whole of the Tianwu continent, the effect of a first-degree strength-boosting talisman is a maximum of 50%, and then Heochin asks Jiankyu if he really thinks that his clumsy tricks can fool an elder of the Spirit Talisman Pavilion like him, and at this, Gaoyang says that the master is right. Jiankyu has never studied the art of talisman arrays, and listening to all that disdain that both the master and the apprentice had for him, the protagonist says that since that's the case, he'll ask the elder Heochin if he'd like to bet with him, and at that, Heochin asks if he'd really like a bet, and at the same time, he thinks he'd like to see what kind of trick this boy can do, because he can't even make a talisman. For Heochin, Jiankyu is nothing but a fraud. And then, the protagonist tells the elder that if the strength-boosting talisman can achieve 100% effect, the elder Chang will compensate him with 300 body tempering pills. And then, he asks what the elder thinks of that, and the boy next to him, hearing the protagonist say that thinks that 300 body tempering pills, he wonders if Jiankyu has an insatiable appetite. At this, Heochin answers the protagonist, saying that if he really can do it, he wouldn't mind giving him 500 body tempering pills, and he thinks that for a dead man, these promises are of no use in the end. The key is that he has to be alive to be able to claim them, and hearing the old man say it, the young man starts to smile, and Heochin says that it's all agreed and asks him to please follow him to the Talisman Pavilion. After arriving there, the place was full of papers hanging from all the supports of the building, and the elder of the Talisman Pavilion said that this was his talisman measuring instrument. Any talisman placed in front of it would have its degree and effect displayed for all to see, and the protagonist asked the elder if he was sure that the talisman measuring instrument wouldn't make any mistakes. And Elder Heochin doesn't like the young master's question one bit. He gets angry and tells him that he's reckless, because the talisman measuring instrument is the pride of his spiritual talisman pavilion, and at that, he asks how the protagonist dares to question his instrument, and at that, Gaoyang was feeling pain while they were tending to his wound, and he asks if the caregiver couldn't be a little kinder, and then, with a Machiavellian smile, he tells Jiankyu that he can see that the protagonist is afraid and says that it's all right for him to confess now, because the young master is going to leave his corpse in captivity. The protagonist goes to the cauldron and throws his talisman cards into it, and after they fall, a large beam of yellow light appears, showing information that it is a talisman that increases strength. It is of the first degree, a central talisman of a higher degree, and its effect is to increase strength by 100%, leaving everyone completely stunned at that moment. They couldn't believe that possibility. The elder Heochin thinks that he doesn't believe that this is true. His strength-boosting talisman can really increase strength by 100% and quickly. He doesn't hesitate to praise it, saying that this is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. The city of Tianshui has produced great talent in the making of talismans, and Gaoyang, seeing this, screams, saying that it's impossible and being overcome with hatred. He thinks that this can't be true. He's the most talented talismanic disciple in the whole of Tianshui city, and of course this achievement should be his. He was in such a rage that his eyes began to bulge, and at this, he simply pushes the person who was tending to his arm, which had been broken, and he runs towards the protagonist. He calls Jiangqiu a bastard, making the protagonist turn back, and then, with a knife in hand, Gaoyang, with a completely demonic face, says that Jiangqiu is using some kind of trickery and he's going to kill him. And while the man was running towards Jiangqiu, completely blinded, overwhelmed by envy and anger at the fact that the protagonist was managing to do something that he strives to be better at every day, the protagonist was quickly defended and the master slapped his apprentice. Heochin shouts with fury in his voice, calling Gaoyang an idiot and saying that the apprentice is embarrassing him, while the boy lies trembling on the ground because of the slap he has taken. And then he shouts again, telling the other boys there that they should hurry up and get their useless brother out of there. And Jiangqiu, watching from afar, gets a smile on his face, thinking that Liu Gaoyang had publicly questioned the talisman's measuring instrument, bringing shame to the talisman spirit pavilion. Chang Heochin's slap may have seemed strong, but in reality, it was a way of saving his precious disciple, and at that, Master Liang turns to the protagonist and calls out to him with a smile on his face, and the protagonist hears his call and asks if Elder Liang has anything to say to him, and at the same time, he thinks that just now Liang was calling him by his full name, and now, he's calling him young master, and it's a bit contradictory how quickly he changes his tone. And then, with a smile on his face, Liang replies to the young protagonist, referring to him as young Master Chu, asking if he is interested in joining his talisman pavilion, and upon hearing the question, the protagonist asks Elder Liang if this is something he can decide for himself, and suddenly, the conversation is interrupted, with a bearded man with long hair just like all the others, saying with great force in his voice that if he can't decide, he could, and at that, everyone bows, saluting the pavilion master, and at that, the young protagonist thinks, and at the same time wonders, if that is the talisman pavilion master, who is called Yang Zhenhai. He is completely stunned at that moment. He also thinks that he had heard that the young pavilion master is as mindless as a dragon. He never shows his face, and he really didn't expect to see him there. At this, Zhenhai approaches the protagonist and tells him that from the moment he entered the talisman pavilion, he has been paying attention to Jiangqiu, commenting that to increase strength by 100%. Not even he can create a talisman with such extraordinary effects as the young protagonist has managed to do, and at this, Liang comments directly to the pavilion master that with Chu Jiangqiu in the talisman pavilion, they will no longer be despised by those old men from the royal city. And then, after hearing Liang's words, the pavilion master tells the protagonist that as long as he is willing to take part in the spiritual talisman pavilion, he can use the resources within the pavilion as he pleases, and they won't restrict any of his actions. He can carry on doing whatever he wants. And then the young protagonist listens carefully to what he says and is completely stunned, wide-eyed. He thinks that if that's the case, then he won't have to worry about alchemy materials in the future, which opens up an absurd advantage for him, and besides, as a disciple of the talisman pavilion, his security will also have an additional layer of protection in the future. And after giving it some thought, he replies to the pavilion master that he will then follow his words, and at that, the master is very happy with Jiangqiu's response, laughing a lot and saying that this is really very good. And then, with a very enthusiastic smile on his face, the pavilion master of the spirit pavilion calls Jiangqiu a boy and asks him to take it, and then he throws an item to the boy, who holds it and stares directly at the talisman in his hands. It was a first-degree talisman master token, and at that, Heochin is completely shocked by what he is witnessing at that moment. He thinks to himself and at the same time wonders what's going on, because Yanger spent several years and half the Liu family fortune to earn the title of first-level talisman master, and yet Chu Jiankyu managed it so easily. At least that's what he thinks, because the young man suffered the devil's bread before, had to be betrayed to get the strength he has now. And quickly, Jiankyu looks at Elder Chang and asks him when he's going to give him the 500 body tempering pills they had bet on, taking the elder by surprise. And at that, the pavilion master tells Elder Chang that he is a second-class talisman master meaning, and then asks him if he would really refuse to settle a debt with a junior. At this, Heochan, with a smile on his face just to break the ice, says that everything is fine and he will send someone to bring the body tempering pills immediately. And at this, feeling absurdly angry, Heochan thinks that Jiankyu had hurt his disciple and made him lose face to this extent, and he will remember this debt, as if Jiankyu had been the wrong one in this story. Then, in a house with several trees nearby and a beautiful blue sky, inside was the patriarch of the family, Liu, better known as Liu Shuxi, and at this, Gaiyang was crying a lot into his sister's legs, saying that she must avenge his brother. As long as Chu Jiankyu lives, he won't be able to put an end to the hatred in his heart. And at this, she was getting extremely annoyed with her brother crying into her legs, because it really is unbearable. At this, Shuxi asks if the young Yaor hadn't already said that that boy was affected by her, and also asks if it could be that she was careless, and the girl replies that no. Jiankyu's danshan had been completely destroyed, and all his cultivation had been transferred to her. There's no way he could still have any cultivation. And at this, Shuxi sighs and comments that the fact that he's alive is undeniable. Judging by her attitude towards Yanger, he intends to completely cut ties with their family, the Liu family, and with a smile on her face, Yair asks what does it matter? Even if he's not dead, he's only at the 4th level of body refinement, hardly worth fearing. And at that, she takes her brother's arms, as if he were a support at that moment. The young woman stood watching her brother with a resolute expression and an intense gleam in her eye, her voice firm and full of conviction. She told him that the Xuanjian sect's recruitment competition was fast approaching. For her this was a crucial event, an opportunity she had been preparing for a long time. She explained that right now she needed to focus all her efforts and resources on reaching the true Kai realm, the next and decisive stage of her cultivation. With a solemn promise, she assured her brother that once she was accepted as a disciple of the prestigious Xuanjian sect, she would use all her power and abilities to defeat Chu Jiankyu. She spoke with contempt, calling Jiankyu an insignificant ant, someone of no importance whom she would easily crush in order to honor her commitment to her brother and demonstrate her superiority. Meanwhile, in a distant room, the young protagonist Chu Jiankyu was sitting on his bed, completely focused on his cultivation. He could feel the energy flowing inside him, and he exhaled it everywhere, as if it was almost overflowing from his body, illuminating the environment around him. Suddenly, he felt a wave of power take over his being, like a rising tide that he could barely contain, and then he advanced in his cultivation. Jiankyu had now reached the 6th level of body refinement, an achievement that filled him with pride. He reflected on the title that had been given to him, the title of Chanshui City's greatest genius, and reflected on the weight that this recognition carried, but at the same time, he couldn't help feeling frustrated. The 500 body tempering pills he had received from Elder Chang, a valuable gift, had run out in less than a single day. The cultivation method he used was failing in its efficiency, requiring Jiankyu to constantly and exhaustively spend resources. He realized that, at the current rate, he would need a lot more money to maintain his progress, which caused him a certain discouragement. Immersed in thought, Jiankyu was suddenly interrupted by a strange noise, a sound that echoed through the room and left him on alert. He raised his head and, surprised, asked aloud who was there, as he hadn't felt anyone approaching. However, before he could prepare himself, a bang echoed, and the wall next to him was suddenly blown apart with brutality. Suddenly, a hooded individual appeared, whose presence emanated a threatening and intense energy. The mysterious figure was using a special ability that created a gigantic and powerful hand made of pure energy, which advanced against Jiankyu with devastating force. Seeing that purple energy hand approaching with such aggression, Jiankyu reacted immediately. With sharp reflexes, he concentrated and, in one agile movement, counterattacked, slicing the energy hand in half, undoing the attack and dispersing the power coming at him. The hooded man retreated, surprised and alarmed at the defensive capacity Jiankyu had shown. He wondered, astonished, how it was possible that someone who was only at the 6th level of body refinement could neutralize his attack, especially considering that he himself was an 8th level cultivator. Jianqiu's skills were clearly superior to what he had expected to face, and this discovery made him uneasy. Jianqiu, sensing his opponent's distraction and shock, took advantage of the moment of vulnerability, and with a dark and threatening tone of voice, he warned the hooded man, saying that being distracted in a situation like this was an unforgivable mistake. In one swift and determined movement, Jianqiu launched an attack against the invader, hitting him hard and throwing him out of the house, sending the hooded man flying outside with an overwhelming impact. Immediately after the confrontation, Ruhua, Jianqiu's faithful servant, ran up to him with an expression of genuine concern on her face. When she saw him standing unharmed, she breathed a sigh of relief, but still asked the young master if he was really all right after the intense fight. Jianqiu, however, remained silent for a few moments, just observing the scene around him, as if analyzing every detail and trying to better understand what had just happened. Ruhua, sensing the tension of the moment, questioned whether that thief had actually broken into the house and whether it would be necessary to send someone to chase and capture him. Jianqiu, with a thoughtful countenance, said that there was no need to take such a measure, as he had let the thief escape on purpose. He thought that possibly that blow was enough, or he was giving a warning. And after that, 5 days later, at the training grounds, Jianqiu was climbing the stairs, leaving some of the boys surprised, with one of them telling them all to watch, because young Master Chu had arrived, and at that, one of the boys asks how he can be so late for such an important clan competition, and also asks if Jianqiu really thinks he's still the #1 genius in Tianshui City, and the other boy comments, referring to the protagonist as a waste, and also says that he's probably too scared to show up. In that case, he could very well give up the position of young master of the Chu family soon, and at that moment, there were 3 old men sitting down, and then, a man in a completely blue dress approached them and greeted the 3 elders. His name was Chu Han, and at that, one of the boys who were present there commented to the other that the young master Chu Han really lives up to the expectations of the great elder. He is polite and humble, and this is the true behavior of a gentleman. At this, the old man approached and whispered, asking if they had already gathered the information about Chu Jianqiu, and at this, the boy, also whispering, replied to the great elder that he should be sure. But Jianqiu has some fighting spirit, but what he fights against is not the skills of the Chu family disciples, but his realm of bodily refinement. He will undoubtedly lose this battle in his opinion. At this, the white-haired old man begins to cough, trying to clear his throat, and then he raises his arm and says that he declares that the clan competition has officially begun, and at this, he tells them to please ask Chu Han to come up on stage, and at this, Han, with a smile on his face and squeezing his wrists, comments to Jianqiu that he's really surprised that it's his opponent. After all, not so long ago, he was still far below Jianqiu. At this, Jianqiu simply bluntly tells Chu Han that he's talking too much. If he wants to compete for the position of young master of the Chu family, he shouldn't waste time saying empty words, and at this, he makes young Han a little apprehensive, to the point of breaking out in a cold sweat, and at this, he gets upset and says that brother Jianqiu is right, so it's all settled, and he quickly sets off towards the young protagonist to hit him with a blow. And at that moment, Jianqiu concentrates some of his energy in his hand, and then hits Han's fist with everything, generating a shock at that moment, and quickly both Han's energy and Jianqiu's energy begin to exhale with that shock, and everyone who was present, witnessing that battle, is completely stunned right from the start. Things were just beginning, but they didn't fail to impress the people, and at that, the boy wonders if he wasn't wrong, because they simply tied the first move they made, and another boy asked if it hadn't been said that Jianqiu only has the cultivation of the body refinement realm, because the young master Chu Han is at the half step of the true Kai realm, and at that, Han thinks, and at the same time wonders how this could happen. At this rate, he wonders that if he were at the same level as Chu Jianqiu, he wouldn't be unable to withstand even one of the protagonist's punches. But at the thought, he becomes completely furious, thinking that no, he can't allow that monster to live, and so he quickly tries to hit the young protagonist with a kick, but Jianqiu quickly dodges. But Han doesn't want to let it go, heading towards the protagonist quickly, and starting to land several blows on him. But the young protagonist manages to fend them all off, colliding his fist with Han's fist every time, and the white-bearded old man thinks that Chu Jianqiu's strength is far beyond the realm of bodily refinement. If this continues, Chu Han will lose, and at that, the old man had a dirty little secret up his sleeve to give Chu Han the advantage advantage. He throws something purple towards the boy, and at that, one of those sitting next to him thinks that this is not good at all. It's a pill that forcibly raises the level of cultivation, and the protagonist should stop Han right away. At this, he stands up quickly, shouting, giving the warning, and at this, the white-bearded old man looks away and comments that when they are on stage, the fight is theirs, and at this, he asks if the third elder is trying to break the rules, and with a tone of desperation. The elder tells the white-bearded old man that the destructive power of that pill is immense and poses great risks to the user. In other words, the white-bearded old man didn't care about Chu Han. He just wanted to get Ganq out of the way, and so, the old man asks the white-bearded old man if, for a mere vacancy, he was willing to destroy 2 young talents, and then, he asks the white-bearded old man if it's really worth it, and the old man replies, a little annoyed by the question he received, that if Ganq is afraid, he can simply surrender, and he thinks at the same time that he has been working for the position of patriarch for so many years. He can't let it all be in vain, and as long as he can kill Ganq, sacrificing Chu Han will be a small price to pay, and at that moment, young Han was putting the pill in his mouth, and the moment he swallows that pill, it has an immediate effect, making him exhale an absurd amount of energy. There has been a breakthrough in his real Kai realm, and Ganq, seeing that, thought that Han was already halfway to the realm of true Kai, a vague level between the realm of body refinement and the refinement of true Kai. But when he reaches the realm of true Kai, it won't be so easy to deal with him. And while he was thinking, Han quickly disappeared and appeared behind the protagonist, about to attack Ganq, and he thought that Han was too fast and he simply wouldn't be able to dodge now. The fight was tense and the atmosphere charged with anticipation. When Han made his aggressive move, trying to hit Ganq with all his strength, everyone watching was in shock, fearing the worst. But, to everyone's surprise, the young protagonist managed to dodge skillfully, deflecting the attack with an agility that showed his high level of training and focus. He thought to himself that Han's blow had passed dangerously close, but he was glad that he had managed to escape in time. However, Han, with a cynical smile on his face, unflustered by his first unsuccessful attack, looked at Ganq with a contemptuous gaze and told him, his voice laden with scorn, that if he knelt down now and begged for mercy, there might still be a small chance of survival. It was a veiled threat, demonstrating Han's confidence and arrogance, believing that Ganq was cornered. However, Ganq, determined and undeterred, replied to Han in a firm and calm tone, saying that he was rushing to make such a statement so soon, that that kind of threat did not cause him any fear. Then Ganq, with an agile movement, put his hand inside his clothes and, quickly and unexpectedly, took out a hidden talisman. In a surprising move, he absorbed the power of that talisman, causing a yellow-colored energy to expand and exude everywhere, enveloping him in a powerful, luminous aura. Han, seeing the yellow energy emanating from Ganq, became restless, but he quickly decided not to give Ganq time to make full use of his new power, so he advanced against the young protagonist, wielding a glittering, firm sword, shouting for Ganq to stop pretending and accept his fate once and for all, because as far as he was concerned, the battle had been decided. Han believed that this display of energy was nothing more than a desperate attempt by Ganq to keep himself in the contest, but fate had another surprise in store for Han. As he advanced with all his determination towards the final attack, Ganq, with a calm expression and a determined look, channeled his energy and, with a quick and precise movement, launched a powerful blast of energy, reminiscent of a Kamehameha, towards his opponent. The explosion of power was intense and, before Han could react, the blast tore through his body, creating a large hole in his torso. The audience, who had been watching in silence and tension, was in a state of shock and amazement. Everyone was in disbelief at what they had just witnessed, because Ganq's attack, so unexpected and devastating, had completely reversed the course of the confrontation. Among those present, one of the boys began to recall rumors that had been circulating in the city over the last few days about Ganq. He told his companion next to him that he had heard stories that Ganq possessed the ability to create talismans of strength, capable of doubling the power of those who used them. And now, after seeing what Ganq had done, it seemed that the rumor that many thought was just fanciful speculation was actually true. In the middle of the crowd, a white-bearded elder, with a shrewd and observant gaze, was visibly impressed by what he saw. He thought to himself that this was really something great. The boy, who many underestimated, had hidden his exceptional skills and abilities very well, now showing a potential that surprised even the most experienced, demonstrating cunning. Ganq took advantage of the moment of surprise and admiration from the audience. He called the attention of the 3 elders present and, in a respectful but determined tone, asked that it was time to announce the result of the contest. The old man with the white beard stood up, taking responsibility for making the official announcement, and, with a firm and clear voice, declared that, from that moment on, the position of young master of the Chu family would continue to be held by Chu Jiankyu. Publicly recognizing the young man's victory, upon hearing the verdict, the crowd began to give shouts of excitement, greeting Jiankyu with great enthusiasm, celebrating his triumph and the great display of power he had just exhibited. And at that, Ruhua goes to her young master. With a bright smile and full of pride, she approached Jiankyu and congratulated him gently, showing sincere joy at the incredible victory of the young master she admired so much and served loyally. Later, there was a banquet in honor of the young master. He was sitting at the table, surrounded by a variety of dishes prepared especially for him, as a way of celebrating the victory. Ruhua, always attentive and with a smile still on her face, approached Jiankyu and, with a warm expression, said that he had worked hard over the last few days and should therefore enjoy the banquet and replenish his energy with the food. Jiankyu, however, gave a slight smile and replied to her, saying that it was enough, that he had already eaten enough and didn't need anything else. Satisfied not only with the banquet, but with the recognition of his position and the success he had achieved in such an important contest, he gets up and starts walking, saying that she should take it back and enjoy it at her leisure, as he's going back to isolation to cultivate. And at this, Ruhua doesn't understand, asking if he's going to isolate himself again, and also says that in the short term, the Great Elder's faction shouldn't be able to cause too much trouble. And then, she asks the young master the reason for his urgency, and the protagonist replies to Ruhua, saying that the Great Elder is nothing to worry about. What really matters is the Xuanjian sect's recruitment competition in Tianshui City in a month's time. Then, in the Xuanjian sect's council hall, a young man was greeting the elders and telling them that the preparations for their sect's recruitment competition in Tianshui City are almost ready, and at this, the elder replied with a bit of disdain that Tianshui County is just a remote area. It's always been difficult to find promising talent there. And at that, the subordinate replies to the elder, saying that however, he has heard that there are 3 young masters who have already reached the true Kai realm, Liu Tianiao from the Liu family and Aoyang Yuan from the Aoyang family, and the elder listening, asks if there aren't 3 and asks where the last one is, and at that, the boy answers him, saying that it's Chu Jiankyu, the young master of the Chu family. He was originally the #1 genius of Tianshui City, but he recently suffered a terrible infestation and is now only at the 6th layer of body refinement. At this, the elder replied that the minimum requirement for the recruitment competition is the 9th layer of body refinement, so it's impossible for him to complete the advancement within 20 days. It seems that he simply isn't meant to, and meanwhile, there was the young protagonist, in the middle of the dark, with his inner light on. He was sitting on the ground, eyes downcast, concentrating, and then, he squints, telling himself that the gathering Kai pill sent by the Pill Pavilion elder has indeed shown remarkable effects. He has successfully advanced to the peak of the 9th layer of body refinement. However, he looks at his hand and tells himself that the 8 most vital extraordinary meridians remain completely independent. The human body contains a total of 20 meridians, divided into 12 primary meridians and the 8 extraordinary meridians. Reaching the peak of the body refinement realm proves that the 12 primary meridians have been successfully opened. As for the 8 extraordinary meridians, only a few exceptionally gifted cultivators manage to open 1 or 2 of them. When 8 extraordinary meridians are fully opened, and the person reaches the maximum state of body refinement, they can cultivate the legendary supreme martial body. To fully open the 8 extraordinary meridians, this must be achieved during the body refinement realm. The boy thinks he doesn't have much time. If he wants to acquire more cultivation resources, the priority is still to earn money. Then it was already daylight, and the sky was beautifully blue. The scene changes to the great hall of the Talisman Pavilion. The master of the pavilion was with several talismans near him and said that it was excellent. In addition to the talisman that increases strength, the other talismans also have multiplied effects. Truly worthy of being the genius talisman maker of Tianshui City. He looks at Jiankyu's face and asks if everything is all right with him, as he looks very tired, then asks him if there's anything wrong, and the protagonist thanks the pavilion master for his concern and explains that he simply didn't sleep well last night, and at the same time, he thinks and wonders how he could sleep well. He spent the whole night in the Supreme Tower Tower of Chaos, trying to understand the formations inside the talisman of origin of the miraculous path, all in order to create more talismans to sell. And at this, the master of the pavilion tells the protagonist that he has arrived at a good time, and it turns out that he has two different guests there, and he can introduce the protagonist to them. And then he asks them to please let the two distinguished guests in. It was a bearded old man, who is known as Elder Zhu Huan of the Myriad Weapons Trading Company, and a young girl, the esteemed daughter of the Myriad Weapons Trading Company, and her name is Xia Yao Huang, and the pavilion master, with a smile on his face, asks them both to let him introduce them to the protagonist. And after introducing them, the protagonist says that he is Chu Jiankyu, and he paid his respects to Miss Xia, and at the same time, he thinks that the Talisman Pavilion is just a minor branch of the Myriad Weapons Trading Company. He would never think that a figure as esteemed as the noble heiress of the trading company would adorn that place with her presence, but instead of her talking to the young protagonist, she just walks straight past, completely ignoring Jiankyu. She approaches the talismans and picks one of them up. She looks at the talisman with a smile on her face, and then she is very direct and looks at the protagonist, saying that as for his talismans, her arms trading company will take all of them, leaving the boy completely stunned. He can't hide it and shows that he is really surprised. With his eyes wide, he asks Xia why she wanted all the talismans he made, and the pavilion master looks at the protagonist and tells Jiankyu that he is a foolish boy. What the lady means is that she wants to collaborate with him. This is a chance to take advantage of the wealth of the #1 financial power of the great Qian dynasty, and the boy is surprised by this, but inside, his eyes even sparkle. He thinks that with this, he will no longer have to worry about the lack of resources for his cultivation. He also thinks that he could concentrate on breaking through the 8 extraordinary meridians in peace. And at that moment, the Xia picks up a talisman and throws it at the protagonist, saying that this is the VIP token of the Myriad Weapons Trading Company. It contains a deposit of 10,000 one-star spirit stones, and any money sold for talismans will be transferred thereto. And the white-bearded old man just watches, becomes a little apprehensive at that moment, thinking that that symbol is something that even the princes of the great Qian dynasty would find difficult to obtain, but the lady has given it to a mere country bumpkin like Jiankyu. And with a smile on his face, the young protagonist gestures with his hands and thanks Xia, saying that this was very generous, and he is deeply grateful for it. And then the old man with the white beard comments that they need him to refine 2,000 high-quality talismans in 10 days and send them to the President Su of the Myriad Weapons Trading Company, Tianshui branch, and then he asks the young protagonist if this is possible. With a serene smile on his face, Chu Jiankyu answered in the affirmative, saying yes, of course, as if it was something perfectly natural for him. At that moment, the young protagonist started to move, calmly leaving the place with firm and resolute steps. Soon afterward, Xia, who had been watching everything carefully, turned to the pavilion master with a curious look on her face and, in a soft voice, asked him what he thought of the whole situation. The pavilion master, also with a smile on his face and a gleam of approval in his eyes, replied that he had carefully examined the talismans that the boy had given him, with the experience of someone who deeply understood that kind of art. He assured Xia that there would be no problem, that those talismans were genuine and reliable. However, something happened that was totally unexpected. Suddenly, as the pavilion master held one of the talismans in his hand, the object began to glow brightly, emanating a strong, almost hypnotizing light. This reaction surprised him to the point of leaving him stunned. He looked at Xia, still holding the talisman carefully, and saw that she was also watching everything. But unlike him, she had an enigmatic, confident smile on her face, as if she had been waiting for this moment. He then let out a laugh, in awe of Xia's talent, and commented jokingly, but also in admiration, that she knew how to hide her talents in an impressive way. Taking a closer look at the talisman that was still glowing in her hand, he commented that although the talisman might look a little rudimentary, it was clear that this was intentional. He realized that young Master Chu had purposely contained the talisman's full potential, suppressing its true note and thus revealing a rare control and ability. Xia, then, smiling with satisfaction, commented that the city of Tianshui had really been worth it, showing that this place hid talents of great value, which she considered a real gem to be preserved. The scene changes, and we now see the young protagonist, Jiankyu, inside the mysterious Tower of Supreme Chaos in one of the rooms on the 2nd floor. In front of him, there was a large concentration of yellow energy, pulsating and vibrating with impressive force. Jiankyu was in a deep state of contemplation and thought that, even if a first-grade talisman could be endowed with a solid energy core, its low grade greatly limited the value and potential of its use. He reflected that, in order to advance on the path of talisman refinement, it would be necessary to rely on the intricate formations of high-level talismans. This kind of advanced technique was essential for creating high-grade talismans capable of releasing truly significant power. Ganq knew it was a long road of learning, but he was determined to move forward, using everything he had to achieve excellence. The narrative moves forward once again, and now the scene changes to the Myriad Weapons Trading Company. 10 days had passed since the previous events, and Chu Ganq was standing there with a firm expression, like someone determined to achieve an important goal. He introduced himself politely, firmly declaring that he was Chu Ganq and that he was there to request an audience with President Su. In a respectful tone, he asked them to inform the president of his arrival, making it clear that he would wait until he was attended to. While Ganq pronounced those words, 3 girls stood a little apart, but listened attentively to everything he said. They laughed and exchanged disdainful glances with each other, clearly underestimating the young man's presence. One of them, with a debauched expression, looked at Ganq and said, in a provocative tone, that he should take a good look at himself and reflect on whether he really thought that someone like President Su would bother to receive someone who, in her view, was nothing more than worthless trash. Ganq's expression changed from surprise to slight irritation at hearing those words laden with contempt. It was then that he realized, as he took a closer look, that he knew those girls. They were Liu, Tian, and Yao, and he would never have imagined finding them in that place, especially at such an important moment for him. Yahello, visibly upset at seeing the protagonist there, didn't hide her impatience and made a sarcastic comment. She said that, since Ganq had managed to survive until that moment, he should at least learn to value his life, keep a low profile, and, above all, stop trying to attract her attention with what she considered pointless antics. In her view, Ganq was nothing more than an insignificant person who indulged in purposeless fantasies. Liu Tianyu, for her part, joined in the provocation, saying that Ganq shouldn't harbor foolish illusions, as fate had mapped out completely different paths for them. With a haughty and cold expression, she made it clear that, for her, Ganq had no value whatsoever, being just an insignificant figure who dared to approach a level he could never reach. Ganq, for his part, remained calm and resolute, listening to those words without allowing them to shake his determination. He knew who he was, and he knew the value of his journey, without having to prove anything to those who didn't see his true strength. And the young protagonist let out a sigh. At that moment, he didn't want any trouble. He was just running after his own evolution, so that when the time came, he would have proper revenge, with no chance of loss. And then he answered the girl, calling her a girl and also saying that she needn't worry. Cultivating such a demonic technique would only turn her into a malevolent ghost. And then, he concludes his speech, saying that she will meet her death in confusion, and on hearing him say that, she gets very angry. She can't believe that she just heard those words coming from him, and then, she looks at him with a devilish face from how angry she is feeling, and asks him how he dares, calling him a failed waste. He dares to insult a young woman like that. They also tell Chu Ganq to watch his language. The Aoyang family are honored guests of the Myriad Weapons Trading Company, and they're going to send someone to throw him out immediately, until suddenly a very beautiful woman appears, calling for Ganq, referring to him as young Master Chu, and says that he's kept her waiting for a long time. That was Su Yangxiang, the president of the Myriad Weapons Trading Company, and the people who were together at the sight of her are shocked. She's extremely beautiful. When the protagonist sees President Su and Miss Zia, he apologizes to both of them, explaining that he was delayed by some matters, and asks them to forgive her. Zia looks at everyone with extreme coldness, and the girls, who until then had been trying to put the young protagonist down, are quite embarrassed, seeing that Ganq has morals in the house. Liu Tianyu is completely crestfallen in that situation, thinking, and at the same time wondering how this can be happening. She refers to Ganq, calling him worthless trash, and how he can be so familiar with someone from the Myriad Weapons Trading Company, and at that, President Su and Zia start walking, asking the protagonist to accompany them, and at that, the young protagonist feels a little bad in that situation, and then, he turns to Lin Tianyu and tells her that she owes him a debt, and he will guarantee that she will pay him back, down to the last detail, and the girl becomes completely irritated, shaking with the other girls in the same way as her. Then the scene switches to the protagonist inside the private camera of the Myriad Weapons Trading Company, and with great enthusiasm, he tells President Su Su and Zia that there are 2,000 first-class spiritual talismans in there, all of which have been very well accounted for, and President Su is completely stunned, witnessing this in front of her, and she thinks that even she herself hasn't seen so many spiritual talismans at once. The speed with which they were refined seems a bit reckless, and at this, she approaches him, and the young protagonist asks the president if he could ask her about the price those 3 talismans might cost, and she looks at those talismans and is extremely shocked. And then, she takes the talismans and tells Zia that those are second-level spiritual talismans, and Zia asks what she's talking about, and at that, the young Zia makes a symbol in her hands, and an energy quickly appears in her hand, and she tells President Su to hold it carefully and not to move, and then, she throws the energy into that talisman, and suddenly, now everyone can see the information on those talismans. The name of the talisman was Strength Boosting Talisman. 2 of the 3 talismans were the same, and the other was called Flash Step Talisman. The classification of that talisman was second level. The grade of talisman was medium, and the effect of that talisman was that when it was activated, it would allow cultivators below the True Kai realm to instantly teleport to a distance of 1 mile. And at this, Zia looked at the protagonist, and she thought that Chu Jiankyu already had the possibility of creating second-level talismans while he was still in the body refinement realm. If he continued to grow smoothly, he would undoubtedly become a great master in the Tao of talismans in the future. While she was reflecting, the poor boy wasn't quite understanding what was going on, and at that, the president looked at Zia and Zia looked at the president. After that exchange of glances which only increased the boy's confusion, President Su began to smile, saying that young Master Chu's talisman refinement skills are truly remarkable. For these 2,000 first-level talismans and the 3 second-level talismans, the Myriad Weapons Trading Company is willing to offer 150,000 spirit stones, causing the young protagonist to be shocked by what she said. His eyes glazed over and his cheeks flushed when he heard that figure. He thinks that 150,000 is far more than the Chu family's total income for 3 whole years. As expected, being a training master is the most profitable profession on the Chanwu continent, and so, with a smile on his face, he thanks President Su for that, and then he calls the president and tells her that he would like to know if her esteemed trading company will be offering any valuable martial arts techniques for sale soon. And at the same time, he thinks that as cultivators, it's not enough to simply cross realms. They also need proper martial techniques to improve our combat strength. And at this, President Su responds to the young protagonist, telling him that tomorrow, the Myriad Weapons Trading Company will be holding a big auction, and she tells young Master Chu, as she refers to him, that he should feel free to attend and take a look. And so, the young protagonist listened attentively to President Su's words. Her words conveyed a delicacy and understanding that he deeply respected. After a few moments of reflection, he nodded to her with a slight smile and, in a calm tone, replied that everything was fine and that there was no need to rush, as they could arrange another meeting at a more convenient time. With that, he prepared to leave the Myriad Weapons Trading Company, saying a respectful goodbye as he walked out of the imposing building. Zia stood in the doorway, her body leaning lightly against the doorframe, watching the young protagonist as he walked away. The scene of her watching him had a serene aura, but at the same time revealed a subtle and curious interest, albeit restrained. Then President Su, with a playful smile, noticed Zia's expression and, laughing, asked her a provocative question. With a humorous tone, he asked Zia if she had ever heard of a stone that takes care of her husband, hinting lightly that Zia seemed to have her eye on the young protagonist in a deeper way than she herself would admit. Zia, surprised by the joke, had her cheeks completely flushed. You could see how disconcerted she was by the joke on her face, the president taking advantage of the moment to tease her a little more. She commented that she had heard rumors about that young master of the Chu clan, telling us in a voice full of curiosity that the protagonist, whom everyone knew as young Master Chu, had fallen deeply in love with a woman and had dedicated 3 whole years of his life to her, as well as his own blood and vital essence. According to the president, he was a man who exuded nobility in his way of loving, someone worthy of admiration, with a sincere heart and genuine determination. The president made this statement trying to arouse some interest in Zia for young Master Chu, wanting the young woman to see his value, not only as a cultivator, but also as someone of character. Zia, however, a little annoyed by Su's insinuations, sighed slightly and replied to the president with an expression of mild irritation. With a determined look on her face, she said that President Su was once again saying nonsensical things and feeding her fanciful ideas, stating that she, Zia, had no interest in young Master Chu, nor in anyone else in that situation. Her words were firm, but her face still bore traces of the blush on her cheeks, indicating that, perhaps, President Su's words had touched something inside her that she preferred not to admit. The narrative progresses, and, on the morning of the next day, the scene unfolds in the large auction house, a place known for its elegant and busy atmosphere. A young girl, with a soft smile on her face and a gentle posture, addressed the young protagonist as soon as he arrived. With a kind and respectful tone of voice, she greeted him, informing him that he had been assigned to private room number 1, located on the 3rd floor of the auction house. With a friendly gesture, she asked him to go ahead and enter without hesitation, informing him that President Su was already waiting patiently for him inside the room. The young protagonist, somewhat surprised by the formality and the special attention, thanked the girl and headed to the indicated place. As he entered the private room, he was greeted by a refined atmosphere, tastefully decorated, and with a privileged view of the rest of the auction house hall. He noticed that there was a table set up especially for him, with a variety of dishes and snacks carefully arranged. However, what really caught his attention was the presence of President Su, who welcomed him with a friendly smile and a glint of hospitality in her eye. She invited him in quickly, mentioning with a touch of humor that he shouldn't waste time, as there were many things to discuss and, naturally, she wanted to make sure he was comfortable and at ease. So once he had settled in, he chose to put his chair in a place that, unintentionally, ended up being a little away from where President Su was sitting. His intentions were only of respect and formality, but the president noticed this with curiosity and, with a somewhat amused smile, made a comment that left him slightly embarrassed. She asked young Master Chu why he had sat so far away from her, hinting in a good-natured way that the distance was perhaps exaggerated, and that he might feel more comfortable getting closer. Jiankyu, realizing what she meant, was slightly disconcerted, but before he could reply, she continued her remark in an even more direct way, saying that if he continued to keep such a distance, she might end up getting her heart broken, which would make the situation more delicate. The young protagonist, a little embarrassed by President Su's comment, laughed discreetly and answered honestly, stating that he was there that day for a specific purpose. He explained that his visit to the auction house was mainly aimed at finding a martial skill that could meet his needs and help him on his path of cultivation, and he asks them to please continue with the main event. The protagonist doesn't know how to live. He's refusing something like that. It seems he's focused on his revenge, and President Su, hearing him say that, thinks that any ordinary man, when he sees her, gets interested and tries in any way to please her. But young Master Chu is different. Truly, his willpower is something extraordinary for her. However, if you think about it, he's devoted 3 years to a girl who betrayed him and, to make matters worse, stole from him. So he probably just doesn't want to know about it anymore out of sheer protection. And then she tells them to give the order, and they'll start, and then the girl tells the president that it's understood, and then, on the 2nd floor, in the main hall, on the auction stage, there was a well-dressed girl, saying that the time had come. They then presented the first item of that auction. It was a sword with blue energy, and the presenter said that the sword was called a frost blade, forged with cold iron 1,000 years old. The starting bid for that sword was 3,000 spirit stones, and in a private chamber on the 2nd floor. Liu Tianyu's brother bid 20,000 for that sword, and then he tells his sister that that sword is a perfect match for the Supreme 3 in vain. It's practically tailor-made for her, and she tells him that she doubts anyone would dare compete with their Liu family, and then the hostess, with a smile on her face, tells him that the master of the number 1 private room has made his bid for 30,000 spirit stones, making the Liu brothers completely shocked. Chanyu even spits out what she's drinking, asking what happened, and he comments to his sister that there are rumors that the number 1 private room is exclusively reserved for distinguished guests of the Myriad Weapons Trading Company, and it seems that someone significant is present, and Tianyu angrily breaks the glass that was in her hand, rather annoyed. She answers her brother, saying that no, that won't work, because with the Xuanjian sect's recruitment competition approaching, she must acquire that sword, and so she tells her brother to continue the bid, and a moment later, President Su tells the protagonist that the Liu family has increased the bid to 50,000 spirit stones, and so she asks the young master if he wishes to continue, and the young protagonist says no and thanks her for it. And with a small cup in hand, he tells her that if they want it, he'll let them have it, and at that, she thinks it's clear that young Master Chu is deliberately raising the price, trying to use the opportunity to teach that ungrateful woman a lesson listen, and she finds all this that's going on really amusing, and at that, the hostess says that the next item is the second in today's auction, with a starting bid of 2,000 spirit stones. However, that item seemed to have an absurd level of wear and tear, and so a boy asks what kind of junk it is and how it could be worthy of an auction, and the boy to his right asks when the myriad weapons trading company's vision for treasures became so poor, and at this, the presenter, visibly nervous, thinks that the appraisers have examined the sword for a long time and found nothing special, and she really doesn't understand why Leader Su insisted on auctioning that sword. And meanwhile, there was the young protagonist in the #1 private room with President Su by his side. He thinks that the Supreme Tower of Chaos is reacting to that sword, and the president asks him if something has happened, and if he has suddenly become interested in that broken sword, and the protagonist answers her, saying that it seems that there is some destiny involved, and when he raises his hand, the president asks him to wait, leaving him unable to understand anything. She continues, saying that young Master Chu is an honored guest of her young mistress, Zia, and since young Master Chu was interested in that sword, she was going to give it to him personally, and Ganq thanks President Su for that, making the symbol with his hands, and then she takes the protagonist's arm, and with a smile on her face, she tells Ganq that he doesn't have to be so polite to her, and then she tells him that what comes next in the auction is the real main event. Then, in the auction phase, 4 subordinates were carrying a green box with several chains, and one of them tells them to be careful, to go slowly, and then the presenter takes a key and opens the padlock that locked that box, and then she opens it and shows the item. With a smile on her face, she says that the next item up for auction is a lower grade Xuan level martial art, the Furious Wave 7-strike palm, and some of the boys who were present at the event are in complete shock, with one of them saying that a Xuan level technique is normally only found in the hands of prestigious families, and the other boy saying that even within these families, without a certain status, one is not qualified to cultivate Xuan level arts, and they think that this time, the myriad weapons trading company has really made an effort, and the presenter, with a smile on her face, says that the starting bid for the Furious Wave 7-strike palm tree is 50,000 spirit stones, leaving everyone who was interested in that item completely dumbfounded due to its high value, and then one of them says that 50,000 spirit stones is heavy. He wonders how ordinary people can afford such wealth, and the other boy, listening to him talk, tells him not to think about it, because clearly these items are prepared for the 4 great families of the capital. It has nothing to do with them, and then, in the private room on the 2nd floor, the Mo patriarch bids 60,000, and then, one of the boys who was talking says that he didn't expect that the head of one of the 4 great families, the Mo family, would personally participate in the event, and it seems that he is determined to acquire that martial art. And then the scene goes to the 2nd floor. In the Liu family's private room, Gaoyang asks Uncle Mo how he can give such a timid bid and asks if he isn't making a fool of himself, and Mo, quite annoyed with Gaoyang saying that, says he's being very arrogant, and Gaoyang answers him, saying if he's being arrogant, it's because he has the means to support him, and then he says that the Liu family is giving a bid of 100,000. At this, Mo is shocked to hear that he had offered 100,000, and Gaoyang continues, saying that no one has ever managed to take anything from the Liu family until they bid 140,000 for the martial art, and the hostess says that the bid of 140,000 spirit stones came from private room #1, and at this, one of the less favored boys says that 140,000 spirit stones is a very high price. Amid a tense atmosphere of expectation and curiosity, one of those present wonders who the mysterious figure is who occupies the exclusive wing of that meeting. The fortune of this stranger seems to be so immense that it could even surpass that of the 4 most influential great families in the region. Seized by a deep indignation, Liu Tianyu, in a moment of uncontrollable rage, grabs a nearby piece of porcelain and throws it to the ground, which shatters into several pieces. With a heart full of resentment, she exclaims bitterly that it's him again, this mysterious person who seems obstinately determined to oppose her family, the powerful Liu family. In this short time, her brother Gaoyang, noticing her disturbance, approaches and calls her by name, reminding her that the amount reached is already 140,000 coins, an amount that is equivalent to almost 3 whole years of the family's income. Concerned about the Liu's financial future, Gaoyang expresses the fear that if they continue to increase their bids, the family could be heading dangerously close to bankruptcy. Liu Tianyu, then, reflecting on the magnitude of the offers made by the mysterious person, comes to the conclusion that for someone capable of offering such large sums, there must not be any limitation of resources. In Tianyu's eyes, this person's wealth is vast, like an unfathomable ocean, and she begins to realize that it may be impossible to compete financially with someone of such purchasing power. Taken by frustration and resignation, Tianyu calls out to her brother and decides that it's time to leave. Gaeyang, understanding his sister's decision, just nods in silence, accepting the inevitable fate. Meanwhile, the narrative quickly moves to the luxurious surroundings of Private Room Number 1, where President Su offers warm congratulations to the young protagonist, who has just won the coveted sword and martial technique carefully stored inside a black box. With a slight smile on his face, the protagonist thanks President Su and comments that he has only rudimentary knowledge of the powerful Furious Wave 7-strike palm technique. Curious, he takes the opportunity to question her, humbly asking if he could trouble her to clarify a few details about this peculiar martial art. President Su, with a calm look, answers the young man and asks him why he is in such a hurry, reminding him that they still have plenty of time to talk. She explains that the Furious Wave 7-strike palm is a technique whose power is mainly concentrated in the first 3 blows, considered average within the lower grade martial arts of the Xuan level. However, it continues, from the 4th blow onwards, each palm movement intensifies, building on the power of the previous one and amplifying the total force of the attack more and more. When, finally, the 7th and final blow is unleashed, the accumulated power of all 7 waves descends on the opponent with the overwhelming force of a raging ocean, becoming capable of rivaling even medium-grade Xuan-level techniques. However, President Su hastens to warn the protagonist about the danger associated with this technique. With a touch of seriousness in her voice, she explains that the Furious Wave 7-strike palm requires an extreme effort from the body, and that any carelessness can lead to serious injuries or even a fatal risk. Showing sincere concern for the young man, President Su hugs him, conveying to him how much she cares about his safety. She concludes by saying that even experienced cultivators in the true Kai realm can find it very difficult to master this technique completely, and therefore asks the young master to proceed with extreme caution when trying to master it, warning him once again about the risks involved, because she would hate to see anything happen to him and the protagonist. Seeing her saying that, and standing very close to him, thinks that this woman is quite cunning, so he simply pushes her so that she moves a little away from him and gives him room to breathe a little, leaving her completely frustrated at that moment, and then he gestures with his hand and thanks her for her concern. He also tells President Su that he has other matters to attend to, and then he says that he was saying goodbye at that moment, while she is stunned to hear that, and then he turns his back and starts walking away from the place, and President Su tells herself that the young protagonist is an absolute idiot because he doesn't give a damn about her, even though she tries to get him to pay attention to her. Then, around the mountain, there was an explosion. It was the young protagonist training. After throwing a blow that creates a small crater in the ground, he thinks it took him a whole night just to reach the 4th blow of the Furious Wave 7 palm strike, and there's still not enough time. It's not that simple to master. Tomorrow is the Xuanjian sect's recruitment competition, but before that, there's something important that he needed to clarify. He then goes to his courtyard feeling very tired. Obviously, he had been up all night training so that he could master the technique to be well prepared for the competition, and after he arrives, Ruhua, with her cheeks flushed and her eyes full of tears, speaks with a tone of desperation in her voice, calling for the young master and saying that she was worried when she couldn't find him all night. And then, the young protagonist, with his dark circles under his eyes, hugs Ruhua with a smile on his face. He tells her to relax a little, saying that she knows that he has already passed through the gates of hell once before, and so nothing will happen to him. And also, he asks if the message that he asked for that someone had sent to her last night was delivered, and also asks if she managed to buy all the materials, and the girl answers the protagonist saying yes, and then she hands him a bag, saying that it has everything, 300 Kai condensation pills in total, all of very high quality, and the protagonist takes the bag and says that this is good and tells Ruhua that he will be in isolation for a day and she should wait outside and not let anyone disturb him, and Ruhua answers him saying that she understood perfectly. Then, after the dialogue, inside the sword pavilion, the protagonist was looking at the sword that he had gotten from President Su. He analyzes every detail of that sword. He thinks that it is the sword of the Dragon Abyss. That sword, it is the only object that has resonated with the Supreme Tower of Chaos so far, and it will definitely not be an ordinary item. And suddenly the sword begins to exude a yellow energy that takes the young protagonist by surprise at that moment, and at that, in the Supreme Tower of Chaos, in the first layer, the young protagonist thinks that he has actually landed in the center of the formation of flowing runes, and just as he was about to touch the sword again, he feels a burning sensation and thinks it's unbelievable, something completely frightening to him until then, and still watching that sword exhaling energy everywhere. He thinks that the depths of the runnel formation of the aimable flow are very deep. With his current ability, he wouldn't be able to refine it. That tower is really domineering. It hadn't even consulted him before ripping the sword out of him. And then, a little frustrated, he tells himself that the Dragon's Abyss sword was something he prepared specifically for the Xuanjian sect's recruitment competition. Now that the tower has taken it, he asks the tower if it will surely give him some compensation. He'd like to know if he's right about that. Until suddenly, a magical rune appears on the ground, leaving him completely stunned. Wide-eyed, he thinks, still a little apprehensive about that sensation. It seems that an endless flow of pure Kai is surging through his body, and this flow of Kai will greatly help the protagonist to cross the 8 extraordinary meridian. However, he will still need more resources to help him cross, or he could risk going astray and succumbing to the demons within. And at that, he stands in shock, testing that Kai with his hand, moving it to and fro, and at that, looking again at the sword that the tower had picked up. He thinks that that's right. The Supreme Tower of Chaos can store the sword of the Dragon Abyss as if it were a space treasure, and he wonders if perhaps it can also help him store the Kai condensation pills. And then, he quickly concentrates and uses his blue-colored energy, quickly making the bag of pills appear in his hand, making him very happy that it worked. He thinks he's ready, and as expected, the Supreme Tower of Chaos can be used as a space treasure, and at that, he takes 4 pills and quickly puts them in his mouth, and half an hour later, he manages to open 7 extraordinary meridians, and quickly, he throws himself on the ground, completely exhausted after having managed to reach this point, and at this, he thinks that since he has opened 7 of the 8 extraordinary meridians, with only the last one remaining, the deepest meridian of life and death, he looks at his own hand and smoke is coming out of it. The meridian of life and death has long been known by martial artists as the Iron Wall of life and death throughout the endless history of the Chunwu continent. Only a few have managed to break through this barrier. At this, the young protagonist tries to stand up, but it's too hard for him. He tells himself that even standing up is exhausting, and at this, he stares at the sword and thinks that even so, he will clear the meridian of life and death and will recover the sword from the Dragon Abyss, and with a smile on his face, he also tells himself that as for recruiting disciples from the Xuanjian sect, he will go with all his might. He will claim victory there too. Then the scene shifts to the city of Chanshui. In the West City Square, one boy excitedly comments to another that the Xuanjian sect's recruitment competition, which takes place once every decade, is finally about to begin, and the boy, hearing him say this, says that every time the Xuanjian sect recruits, they only accept 20 disciples, and he wonders who will have the honor and opportunity to be recruited this time. Wu Yangju, the second son of the lord of the city of Qianshui, is only 17 years old and has already reached the 6th layer of the true Kai realm. People believe that he is undoubtedly the star of that recruitment tournament. In the city of Qianshui, only the young master and Liu are truly the match made in heaven in the opinion of the people. Next, we see a man with a mustache, coughing in an attempt to correct his voice so that he doesn't have speech problems, and then he says that the trial is about to begin, and then he asks if the chosen participants can please go on stage, and then Yangju and Liu Tianiao go on stage, and the people in attendance think that they are the perfect couple and think that they will come first. Liu Tianiao was lost in her thoughts until she suddenly noticed something important. On an impulse, she turned around and, looking in front of her, found the young protagonist. At that moment, Yangju also noticed the presence of the young Jiangqiu and, immediately, with a tone of contempt in his voice, didn't hesitate to call him trash. Yangju, full of arrogance and disdain, addressed Jiangqiu with a provocative question, insinuating if he really dared to stand in front of him again. Yangju's tone of voice showed a mixture of disdain and incredulity, as if he really didn't believe that Jiangqiu would have the courage to stand up there after everything that had already happened. Furthermore, Yangju mentioned that, apparently, the punishment Jiangqiu had received earlier wasn't enough, making it clear that he intended to make him suffer even more. In the meantime, Liu Tianiao, seeing the state of tension, hugged the young protagonist with a mixture of concern and surprise. With a serious expression, expression. She admits that she can't understand what kind of mysterious and perhaps even demonic techniques he could have used to repair his danshin and thus be able to resume his cultivation in such a surprising way. It was something she couldn't fully conceive of, because anyone who knew the basics of martial arts would understand that a damaged danshin was, in most cases, an irreversible sentence. And yet, there he was, in front of everyone, apparently recovered. Yangju, for his part, interrupted with a sarcastic laugh and replied to Liu Tianyao and the young protagonist. He insulted him again, saying that he was nothing but a pitiful idiot and that, no matter how much he insisted on cultivating, he would never again be the prodigy of Tianshui, the one who once occupied the top position among all the young cultivators. Yangju, with bitterness and a touch of satisfaction, insists that Giant Q's time of glory is over forever. The situation intensifies even more when, suddenly, Liu Tianyao brother appears out of nowhere, positioning himself right in front of the protagonist. Without wasting time, he faces him and, with a cold and calculating look, calls him garbage again, reinforcing the humiliation. Then, with a commanding voice, he orders the protagonist to remain exactly where he was, as if he had no right to move without permission. The young protagonist, seeing Liu Tianyao brother standing in front of him and still calling him garbage so naturally, couldn't help but wonder if he hadn't learned anything from what had happened before. So he asked a challenging question, wondering if he really was courting death by daring to appear there again, as if he had forgotten that Giant Q had easily broken his arm in a previous confrontation. Gaoyang, another cultivator present, decided to intervene. He reminded everyone of the Xuanjian sect's minimum recruitment standard, mentioning that to enter it was necessary to be at least at the 9th layer of body refinement, while the protagonist was still only at the 6th level. With a dismissive tone, Gaoyang asked the protagonist if he really believed he was up to being there, insinuating that his presence in that place was an offense. At that moment, the man in charge of organizing the event and calling the participants to the stage intervenes. He announces loud and clear that anyone who is not properly qualified must leave immediately. However, internally, the organizer recognizes the young man in front of him as Chu Jiankyu, which causes him a momentary surprise. At that very moment, something extraordinary happens. The young protagonist, showing remarkable inner strength, closes his eyes for a moment, as if he were concentrating all his energy. Then he reveals the full extent of his power, exuding an energy so dense and intense that it becomes visible, radiating an almost blinding glow. This manifestation of power is so overwhelming that Gaoyang, who was standing nearby, is thrown backwards, almost as if he had been hit by an invisible force. The scene leaves everyone around completely surprised and incredulous. One of the Liu family subordinates, realizing the situation, shouts for someone to quickly catch their young master, who was in danger. A young man, responding to the call, ran to the point where Gaoyang was about to fall, stretching out his arms to catch him before he hit the ground, successfully catching the young master of the Liu family, who at that moment was in an alarming state, foaming at the mouth from the pressure of the energy he had just faced. And, while everyone is processing what has just happened, an old man with a mustache, observing the situation, slowly approaches the protagonist, with a look of evaluation and deep analysis, curious about the true potential of that young man who had just demonstrated such strength. He takes a good look at Chu Jiankyu and thinks that this is the aura of the 9th level of body refinement, and he wonders if the boy really could have broken through in such a short space of time. And at this, the young protagonist greets the old man with the mustache, who is called Luo, and then he calls out to Elder Luo and asks if he is now qualified. And at this, Elder Luo asks him to step forward. And then, Elder Luo comments that this esteemed test stone can evaluate cultivation level, bloodline quality, and much more. You just have to put your hand on it to start. And after the mustachioed man has said this, Yangju tells Tianyao to go first, and she answers him, saying that it's okay, and then the girl walks over and finally puts her hand under the stone. And then the stone shows that Liu Tianyao is 16 years old and her extraordinary meridians are activated. Her bloodline is deep middle grade. Her aptitude is deep middle grade, and the realm is true Kai at the first stage. And at that, the people watching, one of the boys comments that it's a deep middle grade bloodline, and he thinks she's really the goddess of his heart. And at that, the other boy comments that it's incredible that she has a divine talent. And Elder Luo, seeing the information the stone has given, comments that it's not bad at all and is a great seed. At which point the girl turns to the protagonist and comments that even though he has recovered to the 9th stage of body refinement, she wonders how he could compare to her and continue continues, saying that he is still nothing but dirt under the clouds compared to her existence, and the young protagonist is perplexed by her speech, his eyes going wide. But he doesn't pay much attention to what she says and simply starts scratching his nose. Then Yangju approaches the stone and touches it with his hand, giving his information. Yangju is 17 years old, has 3 extraordinary meridians activated, his lineage is Earth grade, top level, Earth grade aptitude middle level, and his realm is True Kai at the 6th stage. And at that, Elder Luo, seeing Yangju's abilities, thinks that he is a genius, a true prodigy. Even in the Xuanjian sect, there aren't many martial artists with an Earth grade bloodline, and at that, the crowd that was present vibrates. One of the people who was witnessing that moment comments that this is what a true prodigy from the city of Tianshui looks like. And finally, Tianshui County produced an absolute powerhouse until it was the protagonist's turn. Young Jiankyu went to the stone and put his hand under it, and the moment he put his hand under it, the stone, which until then hadn't reacted so differently from one person to the next, now showed a huge beam of light that left everyone perplexed and wondering what was going on. Everyone tried to close their eyes because the light was really strong and it was bothering them, and then the stone showed that Chu Jiankyu was 17 years old and had 7 extraordinary meridians activated. His lineage was heavenly grade, lower level, and his aptitude was heavenly grade, middle level, and his realm was body refinement at the 9th stage, and Liu Chaniao went into shock, wondering what was going on. She couldn't believe that he was of heavenly grade lineage, lower level, and Gao Yang is also shocked by what he is witnessing at that moment. Really, Jiankyu was different. The stone simply lit up the entire square of the western city. Everyone was completely stunned, wide-eyed, and finding it incredible. Elder Luo thinks that of the 8 extraordinary meridians, he has already cleared 7. If he clears the last one, he will be able to reach the legendary pinnacle of the body refinement realm, the former #1 prodigy of Tianshui City. At this moment, it seems that he has returned to his former glory. At least that's what Luo believes. And then the protagonist thinks that that test result is false. Just now, the Supreme Tower of Chaos in his sea has released a ray of spiritual light that has irritated the test stone, because his bloodline has already surpassed the celestial grade. This light has altered the classification of his bloodline if his bloodline is exposed. This could shock the entire Kaiyan dynasty. At this point, he can't tell if this is a blessing or a curse. And then, he looks at Liu Chaniao and asks her when she or Yangju conspired to leverage him, and asks if the two of them ever imagined that this day would come. And after saying this, Chaniao looks at him completely frightened, and at this, people go into shock, wondering if Jiankyu had been harmed by Chaniao, and at this, Chaniao gets completely flustered, saying no. She says it wasn't her, and she had nothing to do with it. And the young protagonist, in a rather cold and calm manner, tells her that in order to cure her of the cold poison caused by the 3 yin meridians, every month for the last 3 years, he had sacrificed a drop of his essential life's blood without interruption, and to think that she and Yangju had conspired to steal his bloodline, cultivation, cut his meridians, and break his dantian. And then, increasing his tone of voice and with great fury, he asks how there can be a woman as heartless as her in this world, with a mind as poisonous as a snake, and Tianiao becomes completely desperate listening to him saying all that and the people listening to all that talk. She begins to tremble a lot and kneels on the ground, and Yangju asks the protagonist if he isn't being too insignificant. The young woman known as Yaor simply refused, firmly and resolutely, to accept any relationship with him, which made him deeply angry, and, because of this rejection, he began to treat her harshly and disdainfully. Observing this situation, the young protagonist, unable to contain his indignation, raises his voice and questions in an accusing tone if this is really how a true gentleman should behave. He stresses that an honorable man should never act with such resentment just because a young woman chose not to reciprocate his feelings. When Yangju finishes speaking, the young protagonist, who already had an answer ready, quickly retorts. He states without hesitation that the second young master of the Yu family used a forbidden and obscure technique, the demonic art of blood transfer, a sinister practice that serves to steal another person's bloodline. The protagonist then faces him and asks, in a defiant tone, if he really believes that this is the behavior of a real man. He insinuates that this cowardly and corrupt attitude is far from reflecting any honor or dignity, contrary to what a gentleman should represent. As soon as the protagonist makes this accusation, a great uproar begins to spread among the audience. For the first time, everyone present is aware of the atrocities and dark manipulations that the two Yangju had plotted against the young protagonist. The revelation is a total shock, and the expressions of those present reflect their surprise and disbelief at what they have just heard. No one expected that the second young master and Yangju would be able to resort to such an evil and forbidden technique. She explains that if a martial artist is discovered practicing this technique, he will be condemned by everyone, without exception, as such a practice is seen as one of the greatest transgressions in the world of martial arts. Meanwhile, the man with the goatee, who also heard the protagonist's accusation, realizes the gravity of the moment. He understands that if Jiankyu continues to speak, the secret of the forbidden practice of blood transfer will be completely exposed and revealed to the public, and if that happens, the Wu family will be in trouble. Without wasting any more time, he takes the decision to interrupt the protagonist and starts walking towards him with an expression of anger. With a look of contempt, he approaches the young man and insults him, calling him a useless brat. In a threatening tone, he asks the protagonist if he really believes that, just because he is a talented genius, he has the right to make up lies and slander others without any consequences. He claims that the young man has no right to accuse anyone with these blatant lies, trying to divert the public's attention. The young protagonist, however, stands firm and does not back down in the face of provocation. He looks at the lord of the city with a penetrating gaze and responds with a sharp question, wondering if the lord of the city really had anything to fear being revealed to the public. This challenge only increases the anger of the goateed man, who, seized by a fit of rage, decides to attack him right there to silence him once and for all. In a sudden movement, he raises his hand and, in an instant, it is covered with intense flames, ready to be launched against the young man. With a tone of voice full of hatred, he shouts that this is total nonsense and that he himself would crush the protagonist with a single blow. Without hesitating, he launches the attack with all his might, willing to end the matter there. The blow hits the young protagonist full on, and the impact is so overwhelming that he is thrown backwards. The force of the attack pushes him a good distance, but he manages to stay on his feet. Feeling the pain of the impact, the protagonist raises his gaze towards the lord of the city and, while catching his breath, reflects on the immense power he has just faced. He realizes that Yang Yuan's cultivation level has reached the realm of transformation, a higher level where energies rise beyond true Kai. In his mind, he recognizes that this difference in power is enormous and that he himself, in that state, would not be able to face someone like Yang Yuan. While the young protagonist processes all this, the man with the goatee, identified as Yang Yuan, looks at him with an expression of surprise and perplexity. In his mind, Yang Yuan reflects on the fact that Jiankyu, being only at the stage of body refinement, was still able to survive a blow that should have been deadly. He wonders, intrigued, how the protagonist could have resisted the power of his flaming palm, and this makes him suspicious. For someone with his experience, it was inconceivable that a young man at such a low level of cultivation could have resisted the impact of his technique, which only increases the tension and mystery surrounding Chu Jiankyu. He wonders how this could be possible, and then a man grabs the young protagonist's shoulder and calls him a brat, saying that he didn't expect him to have such a complicated background, and then he lifts the protagonist up, and then Jiankyu doesn't understand, seeing that the young pavilion master is there, smiling at him, and then he asks why he's there, and then the young pavilion master answers the protagonist, saying that young Master Chu is a member of his spiritual talisman pavilion. Since his people have been wronged, like his pavilion master, it's natural for him to step on Chu Jiankyu's behalf, and at that, he goes to Yangju and calls him a fool and believes that he must have a death wish and asks how he dares to practice a forbidden art, like the blood transfer demon art, and at that, Yangju answers the pavilion master saying that he didn't do it, and asks the pavilion master that he shouldn't believe one-sided accusations. And after hearing Yangju say this, the pavilion master replies that whether it's true or not, a simple test will reveal all this, and quickly, Yang Yuan appears in front of Yangju and asks the pavilion master if he really intends to get involved in a life and death struggle with the Aoyang family, which is his family, and at the same time, he thinks that Yang Zhenhai and he have entered the realm of sea transformation, and so, this struggle won't be easy for him at all. At this, Yang calls Yang Yuan a brat and asks how he dares to act so arrogantly, and asks if he is really saying that he will kill the disciple of his talisman pavilion, and also, even though he speaks of mutual destruction, he also asks if Yang Yuan has the strength to back up the words he has just said, and at this, Yang Yuan answers the pavilion master, saying that he is the lord of the city of Tianshui, and then, he asks Yang Zhenhai if he dares dares to kill him, and the pavilion master answers the lord of the city that he won't make a single move. But if the brat there really had cultivated the demonic art of blood transference and used it to take over someone else's bloodline, then he had committed an unforgivable crime. And at that, the city lord told Yang Zhenhai to just try and touch Yangju so he could see what might happen, showing a completely dark red energy that left everyone completely stunned. The people recognize that it's the blood demon sect, the sect that simply kills people as if they were nothing, and so despair quickly hits the crowd and they start running, trying to escape and save their lives as long as they can. And at that, with a smile on his face, Yongyuan greets his older brother Lai, and at that, the creature that had a completely dark aura calls the lord of the city useless. He says that Yongyuan has ruined years of careful planning for their sect, and when they come back, Yongyuan will pay for it. At this, the mustachioed man comments that the Aoyang family have been part of the blood demon sect all this time, and at the same time, he is completely perplexed. He thinks that if it hadn't been for Chu Jiangqiu, the blood demon sect's conspiracy would have succeeded. Until then, he would have been condemned for all eternity. And at that moment, Yang Zhenhai starts laughing, saying that old Lai, it's been a long time, but he's still as arrogant as ever. And at that, Lai answers Yang, saying that enough of his cryptic words. Although he's no match for Yang Zhenhai, if he dares to kill Yangju, he'll ensure that the whole city falls with him. And in this, the master of the Talisman Pavilion thinks that with Aoyangju's talent, when he grows up, he will surely become an unparalleled force on the demonic path. He can in no way be allowed to survive. But with old Lai's methods, if it comes to the real fight, he fears that not even he himself will be able to protect everyone. The ones who will suffer will still be the ordinary people, who are completely innocent in this case. And then, old Lai asks Yongyuan what he's waiting for and tells him to come quickly, and Yongyuan, the lord of the city, just tells Lai, and then he grabs Yangju by the shoulder and tells him that they should leave now. And at the same time, Yongyuan thinks that the identity of the Aoyang family has already been exposed. They can't stay in Chenchui City anymore, no matter what. They need to leave that city immediately. And then, as Yangju starts to walk, Liu Chaniao simply grabs the boy's foot, completely desperate, still on the ground, her eyes full of tears. She begs Yangju to take him with them, because if he doesn't, Giant Q will never let her go. And then Yangju thinks that he's fighting just to save himself now, and how is it possible to think of a useless person like Liu Tianyao? And at that, he thinks, and at the same time wonders how she dares to drag him down, and says that she should get lost and just die, until just as he's about to do something with her, Yongyuan tells him to wait and tells Yangju to take her with him, because that woman has all 3 yin meridians cut and a heart full of poison. She's naturally a demon child. And at that moment, Yangju sighs and gives the girl his hand to lift her off the ground. And then, being very pretentious, he asks Year not to cry, asking her what would be the possibility of him simply abandoning her, and she looks silly, taking his hand. And after that, they quickly leave, and then Elder Luo thanks the pavilion master for having lent a hand, because if it hadn't been for his intervention, they might not have come out of that argument alive. And then the pavilion master, laughing a lot, tells Elder Luo that when he comes back, he should tell old Zuo from the Xuanjian sect that he owes him a big favor, and then he flies away from the place. And then Elder Luo asks the Talisman Pavilion master to take care of himself, and then Elder Luo thinks that it seems that the only person with the surname Zuo in the Xuanjian sect is the sect master himself. If he delivers that message, he's afraid he'll end up sitting on icy benches for the rest of the days he has left, until they hear someone shouting, saying that old Yang is very quick when it comes to running away. And at that, the young protagonist and Elder Luo stand still, looking at that purple energy approaching them, and suddenly a very beautiful woman appears from that purple energy. She is the master of the 4th peak of the Xuanjian sect, and her name is Kui Yanian. And then Elder Luo salutes the master of the peak, Kui, and Master Kui is very direct, saying that it's not surprising that they haven't heard from him for all these years, and it turns out that he was hiding in that miserable place. And at that, she, visibly irritated, says that he shouldn't think he could escape from her. If not, she'll surely settle the accounts from before. And at that, Elder Luo gets completely frustrated, thinking that it seems that Senior Yang not only knows people from the Blood Demon sect, but also has old ties with Master Kui, and he wonders who this man is exactly. Suddenly, just as all the tension was unfolding, Master Kui of the Blood Demon sect, known for her imposing presence and ruthless authority, appeared on the scene. She was accompanied by other members of the sect, who were attentively observing what was going on around them. Master Kui, with her cold and impatient gaze, was following the situation with a semblance of few friends, clearly in no mood to waste time. The young protagonist, upon noticing her presence, quickly thought to himself that it really had nothing to do with him, and that the best thing he could do was to get away from there. Without further ado, he began to walk away, avoiding getting involved in the conflict and keeping his focus on other matters that were more important to him. However, before he could get any further away, Master Kiwi, noticing his movements, interrupted him with a firm gesture. On her face was visible the slight annoyance of someone who was already fully aware of everything that had happened there. With an expression of irritation, she pointed directly at the young protagonist, abruptly calling him a boy and ordering him to kneel down. Surprised by the direct approach and the authority in her voice, the protagonist hesitated for a moment, but realized that Master Kiwi was someone who would not be questioned. Master Kiwi then declared, in a firm and strong tone, that he should recognize his new master, and that from that moment on, he would officially be a disciple of the fourth peak of the Xuanjian sect. Her declaration took the young protagonist completely by surprise, not knowing exactly how to react. He looked at her with a confused expression and then pointed to himself, silently questioning whether she was really talking to him. He wondered internally if it wasn't some kind of mistake. With a mixture of doubt and nervousness, he then replied to Master Kiwi, commenting that the situation seemed somewhat contrary to the rules, since, normally, disciples recruited by the sect should first return to the central location, where they would undergo a formal examination before their future was decided. According to him, this was the standard and expected process. With an increasingly evident air of impatience, Master Kiwi released an aura of oppressive energy that filled the room. Her presence seemed to bend the gravity around her, making it clear that she was not willing to discuss the rules with the protagonist. She then replied firmly that she had the right to take whoever she wanted into the sect, and would do so at her will. Then, without hesitation, she asked the protagonist in a defiant tone if he had any problem with her decision, making it clear that she would not accept resistance. The young protagonist was stunned, completely taken by surprise. He had never imagined that such an influential and feared figure as Master Kiwi would show interest in him and take him to the fourth peak. Especially considering the reputation that this peak carried, he reflected for a moment on the 7 peaks of the Xuanjian sect and how the fourth peak, in particular, was famous for being the most difficult to manage. This was largely due to the volatile personality and strong temper of his master. Master Kiwi, who had the most difficult demeanor to deal with of all the leaders of the peaks. He pondered whether accepting this offer was really a good idea, but he knew that refusing was not a wise option. Master Kiwi, noticing that the young man was standing still, staring at her in the midst of his thoughts, began to get even more irritated. Without hiding the annoyance in her expression, she asked in a dry and authoritative tone what he was still waiting for and repeated her order for him to kneel and officially acknowledge his master. Not wanting to prolong the situation and realizing that there was no escape, the young protagonist put his hands together in a sign of respect, performing the traditional gesture, and said with reverence, "The disciple Chu Jiankyu pays his respects to his master." Master Kiwi, satisfied, gave a slight smile, a sign of approval, and commented that this was very good, signaling that his acceptance made her happy. Still satisfied with the decision, she continued to instruct him, throwing an object in his direction. It was a special token, a kind of amulet or symbol of command, which she ordered him to take with him to the Xuanjian sect. She explained that when he arrived, he should use that token to go directly to the fourth peak, without the need to go through the rigorous entry tests that new disciples were normally subjected to. When he heard this, the young protagonist was surprised and looked at the token in his hand. The token was a deep blue color, with a subtle and mysterious glow, being an object of singular beauty and great symbolic value. He reflected that this simple object, although small, carried great meaning, and would be his key to entering a new and unexpected chapter in his life within the sect. And then the scene changes to Chu Jiankyu's room, and at that moment, Ruhua was looking like a cat in boots, asking him to please take her with him, and then she lowers her head, and the young protagonist and he take her shoulders, asking her to raise her head and asks her what she's doing, and at that, Ruhua, crying, tells him that since her father left, she's only had her young master, and she wanted to go to the Mystic Sword sect with him and serve him as she already does, and at that, the young protagonist tries to console Ruhua, saying that the Xuanjian sect is a big sect, full of rivalries and hidden conflicts, and she doesn't have the strength and cultivation. If she goes with me, it could cause harm to her, and at that, she starts wiping her tears and asks the protagonist if he's going to come back back to see her, and at that moment, the young protagonist hugs her, leaving the girl completely stunned. He tells her to be well. When he settles down in the Xuanjian sect, he will certainly bring her there. But before that, he needs her to do something for him, and so he takes a drop of his blood and shows it to her, saying that this is a drop of life essence blood, and he will use it to increase her potential. And then he touches Ruhua's forehead with the drop of blood, which quickly causes her to have a great energy around her body. And then, suddenly, she faints and the protagonist holds her. He thinks that he would never have expected that with his supreme chaos bloodline, he could directly help to awaken a mid-level earth bloodline. And then, he says that from now on, she can cultivate with peace of mind, and she should wait for him to return. And then, the scene changes to the deck of the cloud boat, and at that moment, the young protagonist was staring at the landscape while he was traveling. Suddenly, a girl discreetly approaches the young protagonist, tugging lightly at his clothes to attract his attention. She greets him with a respectful and polite gesture, bowing slightly as she addresses him as young Master Chu. She then introduces herself with a shy smile, revealing her name, Fu Lingsu. In a soft tone, she explains that she is also from the Tianshui region, the same locality as the protagonist. The surprise and satisfaction evident on the protagonist's face at meeting a compatriot in the midst of so many strangers. He responds with formal greetings, maintaining his respect for the girl. Then he makes a brief analysis, commenting that, judging by the aura of energy emanating from her, her cultivation seems to have already reached the true Kai realm, which means that she is at a higher level than him. Fu Lingsu, hearing these words of recognition and praise, is visibly embarrassed, but also flattered. Lowering her gaze slightly, she smiles and says that he makes her embarrassed by praising her in this way, and, with a gentle tone, asks him to dispense with the formalities, suggesting that he simply call her Zuer, a more intimate and affectionate nickname. A little hesitantly, but taken by a sudden courage, Zuer then explains to the young protagonist that this is the first time she is traveling alone, away from her hometown and the people she knows. Knowing that he is also from the same city, she asks, with a touch of shyness and blushing cheeks, if he could take care of her in the future and perhaps guide her if she needs it. The protagonist, realizing the girl's sincere request and shyness, opens a warm smile and replies that, of course, he could do that and that it would be a pleasure to help her on her journey. However, while answering, he notes some important details about her. He reflects, in thought, that although Fu Lingsu's cultivation is superior to his own, her temperament is still very naive and vulnerable. He thinks that if she continues with this fragility and sensitivity, perhaps, one day, other people might try to take advantage of it and harm her. Soon, they both arrive at the vast main square of the famous Xuanjian sect, a place full of energy and people from all regions and levels of power. The scene is grandiose. Several people descend from a majestic flying boat down a long stone staircase that leads directly to the heart of the sect. It is a remarkable moment for all the aspiring disciples, who, for a moment, stand admiring the magnitude and grandeur of the place. As they descend the stairs, a person with a serious posture and a welcoming countenance, positioned outside the square, welcomes them with a smile on his face. On behalf of the Xuanjian sect, he speaks loudly for all to hear, inviting anyone interested to join one of the sect's alliances, known as the Xuan Alliance. The movement intensifies, with several members of the alliance holding flashy signs and with warm smiles, also announcing another association called the Purple Mist Society. These proud members claim to be elite disciples of the outer sect and explain that if new recruits join them, they will have the privilege of receiving valuable and exclusive guidance from the more experienced senior brothers. This promise of support and learning attracts the attention of many, but the protagonist, as he continues down the stairs with Fu Lingsu by his side, makes an observation in a low voice. He asks if even a grand and respected sect like the Xuanjian sect also harbors secret alliances and internal factions, something he imagined to be more common in smaller or less disciplined groups. Fu Lingsu, upon hearing the comment, replies with knowledge and a tone of disinterest. She reveals that she had heard about these alliances through her grandfather, who explained that, in general, these associations are formed by external disciples with average talent and lower levels of cultivation. She mentions that, according to him, these groups are not usually worthwhile for cultivators who are really looking to improve themselves and achieve great things. For her, these alliances are just social networks of mediocre disciples, without much to offer those who really have ambitions of greatness. She continues, pointing to a group in the distance and mentioning that, even among the outer disciples, these alliances are only interested in recruiting warriors who already have some considerable level of strength. People like them, who come from smaller and distant regions, often end up ignored by these alliances, who prefer those who already have a minimum of reputation or influence. The conversation between the two continues as they observe the diversity and complexity of the Xuanjian sect. The protagonist absorbs the information Zuer shares, carefully considering what she said about alliances. He thinks that this experience in the Xuanjian sect will be more complex than he imagined, and that he will need to be careful when deciding who to ally with and who to trust. Suddenly, without anyone expecting it, a young man appears in front of them, walking confidently, and, with a somewhat arrogant smile, addresses Fu Lingsu directly. He approaches without ceremony, interrupting her conversation with the protagonist and, in a casual tone, asks if she would be interested in joining the Purple Mist Society. Without giving a damn about the presence of the young man next to her, without asking permission, he takes Fu Lingsu's hand in his, leans a little towards her, and, in a suggestive tone, comments that she has a pleasant and delicate perfume, saying that, by joining the Purple Mist Society, they could have long and fruitful discussions. The boy's insinuating tone, together with the invasive gesture, makes Fu Lingsu extremely uncomfortable. Without hesitating, she replied no, promptly refusing the offer to join the society. While she tried to pull her hand back, the young protagonist, sensing Fu Lingsu's discomfort and hesitation, didn't think twice. In a quick and decisive move, he raised his hand and slapped the young man's hand firmly, forcing him to let go of hers. Jiankyu, standing his ground, faces the boy and declares loudly that she is clearly not interested in the offer. He asks with a defiant tone if the boy intends to force her into something against her will. The boy, visibly irritated by the intervention, glares at the protagonist and, without hiding his disdain, calling the young protagonist a piece of garbage for only being in the realm of bodily refinement. He tells him to be quiet, making it clear that someone as low level as him shouldn't even dare to intervene, and tells him to leave. At that moment, two people who were watching the scene from a distance started whispering to each other. One of them, intrigued, asked who this new disciple was who had the audacity to provoke Han Eni, one of the most imposing members of the Purple Mist Society, who was just trying to recruit Fu Lingsu. The other person, a young woman, commented that Han Eni was known for his authoritarian and domineering personality. She said that she had heard rumors that he had recently been responsible for the death of a junior sister from the same society, in circumstances that had generated a lot of comment. With a cautious tone, she adds that Han Eni is not someone to be trifled with, as he has family connections with an elder of the outer sect. Being his uncle, this elder's presence in the sect guarantees him a protection that few would dare to challenge, leading them to conclude that it would be unwise to confront him. Finally, they wonder who the audacious Chu Jiankyu would be, who intervened against someone so influential. Just then, a small commotion broke out up ahead. A few boys drew attention to a figure that had just appeared, a stunningly beautiful young woman who had just appeared in front of them. At the sight of the girl, they realized, almost dumbfounded, that she was not just any girl, but none other than the legendary Zuo Q Lingzhu, the fourth junior sister of the peak of the Xuanjian sect. The group of boys could barely disguise their fascination, and many stared at her, completely enchanted. They murmur among themselves, wondering if that really could be Zuo Q Lingzhu, as she exudes an almost divine aura, looking more like a deity than an ordinary person. One of the boys comments that the goddess rarely visits the outer sect, but when she does, half of the disciples dream of being lucky enough to at least catch a glimpse of her once. Her presence causes such an intense commotion that one of the boys is so stunned and excited that, in an impulsive gesture, he bites his own garment, unable to contain his excitement. He wonders who could be so honored and blessed as to attract the attention of the goddess personally. With his eyes shining with curiosity, he speculates if anyone there would be worthy of such an honor. In the midst of this chill, the young protagonist, observing the situation, decides to introduce himself. In a calm but firm tone, he says that his name is Chu Jiankyu, leaving everyone present in a state of surprise. Hearing this, Han Eni, the boy who had previously been pestering Fu Lingsu, felt his face flush with frustration. He was overcome by a mixture of incredulity and indignation, trembling with anger and confusion. He thought to himself, how is it possible that junior sister Zuo Qiu, the most revered figure on the peak, has come here just to see Chu Jiankyu? Because to him, the protagonist is nothing more than an insignificant piece of trash. Thinking that he is a mere cultivator of the body refinement realm, someone who should be irrelevant in front of such important figures. And Zuo stares at him and comments that he's very handsome, and it's not to be expected that the master would would have liked him, and then she introduces herself to him, saying that her name is Zuo Q Lingju and she's his older sister and he should follow her to the peak room where she'll personally organize his accommodations. And after she's said that, the young protagonist asks senior sister Zuo Q to wait just a moment, and then he comments that his younger sister Lingsu doesn't want to join the Mystic Cloud Society, and he asks that boy please not to keep pressuring her, and Zuo, hearing this, becomes visibly irritated with Han Eni, and then her energy quickly begins to exhale and she asks Han Eni what's going on there, but Han quickly bows to the ground and with a trembling voice he answers no several times, saying that he wouldn't dare. Since junior sister Fu doesn't wish to join the Mystic Cloud Society, he won't insist, and then, with a smile on her face, she tells the protagonist that this should be solved, and then she tells him to follow her now. And while they walk, Fu is very nervous at that moment, until while they are walking, the young protagonist turns to Zuo and comments that given the commotion now, he wonders if his older sister has already reached the realm of the transformation of the sea. And then Zuo answers the young protagonist by saying that really, only those in the realm of sea transformation can be accepted as personal disciples of the fourth peak. And then she gets a little closer to his ear and says that for someone like the protagonist, who is still in the realm of bodily refinement, becoming a personal disciple is something that only happens once in 1,000 years. And then they arrive at the fourth peak in the Xuanwan sect, and Zuo tells the protagonist that they have arrived, and she says that now this will be his residence, and he is a little perplexed by what he is seeing. He asks Zuo that this place is obviously decorated in a feminine style, and then he asks her if she's sure they're in the right place, and Zuo calmly answers the young protagonist, saying that there are only 4 people in the peak room, including their master, and all of them are women. So this would clearly be reflected in the decoration, and this information took the young protagonist by surprise. He gets a bit nervous and tells Zuo to wait a bit and asks if he's the only man there, and at that, Zuo answers him, saying that's exactly what it is, and the other older sister is currently in isolation, and he'll have the chance to meet her in the future. And Jiankyu asks her about the master. According to tradition, he still needs to formally pay respects to the master to officially become an inner disciple. The girl replies, with a calm look on her face, that their master is probably busy at the moment, as it's common for her to get involved in heated disputes with other elders on occasions like this in order to recruit the most talented and promising disciples. After these words, the scene changes, transporting our attention to the imposing meeting hall of the Xuanjian sect, a grand setting adorned with rare splendor. The hall was a beautiful place, decorated with meticulous details and sacred symbols that reflected the greatness of the sect, conveying a sense of reverence and tradition. Inside this room, a high-ranking male figure, with an imposing bearing and an air of satisfaction, let out a laugh that echoed off the walls. He exclaimed enthusiastically, saying that this was excellent. After all, the Xuanjian sect had finally managed to train a disciple with a celestial grade bloodline, something that hadn't happened for a long time. This event was a milestone of extreme importance, and his excitement overflowed as he recognized the magnitude of this event, at which point the elder Luo, with a respectful gesture, approached to make a formal report to the master of the sect. With a humble posture and a voice laden with admiration, he informed him that Chu Jiankyu, the new prodigy, had already managed to unblock 7 of the 8 extraordinary meridians, something that was extremely rare and challenging. He adds that, with the opening of yet another meridian, Chu Jiankyu will be able to reach the legendary supreme martial body, a feat that few have achieved in the entire history of martial arts. This report causes an old man with a white beard, sitting in a prominent position, to start laughing happily, completely elated at the idea that such a talent is now part of the Xuanjian sect. This man, known for his wisdom and years of experience, is called Zuo Qiu, and he exclaims, almost incredulously, that Chu Jiankyu really is a prodigy, a true celestial prodigy, someone with unique and extraordinary potential. Just then Tang Yushin, a man with a well-trimmed mustache, approaches and addresses the elder Zuo Qiu, reminding him that the third peak, which he leads, hasn't accepted a disciple for more than 10 years. He says that it would be an honor to receive Chu Jiankyu as his disciple, and invites him to join his peak, arguing that he needs an apprentice of such high talent to take up the tradition of great warriors at his peak. Tang Yushin is therefore the master of the third peak of the Xuanjian sect, and he is determined to ensure that the young prodigy is integrated into his group. However, before Tang Yushin can finish, another man, Xing Yuanqing, who is also one of the peak masters, rebuts Tang's argument with an expression of irritation, saying that the reason he hadn't accepted disciples for so long was simply because of laziness and not because of a lack of opportunities. Xing Yuanqing, who leads the second peak, comments that a genius like Chu Jiankyu should join his peak, where he can be molded in the best way to achieve true greatness. Xing Yuanqing has an air of authority and confidence, believing that only he can offer the proper training to someone with Chu Jiankyu's abilities, and makes it clear that he is willing to fight to ensure that the young man joins his peak. Observing the growing debate, another master, Gong Heiluan, a burly man, stands up and addresses his older brother Xing Yuanqing, saying that he already has many disciples under his tutelage and works hard to train them, so he should leave that responsibility to another master. He suggests that the fifth peak, led by him, could take on the burden of training Chu Jiankyu, commenting with a half-joking tone, but making it clear that he is interested in welcoming the young man to the fifth peak. Gong Heiluan, who is the master of the fifth peak, speaks with a smile on his face and a touch of levity, but his intention is genuine, and he hopes that his offer will be considered. At that moment, a very beautiful woman, with an elegant posture and a slight smile on her face, sighs deeply and expresses her opinion. She comments that, in her view, it is practically certain that the young man will choose the seventh peak, the peak under her leadership, because who wouldn't want to have a master as charming as her? This woman, extremely confident in her own beauty, wears a bright red outfit that highlights her presence. Her name is Qin Meridian, and she is the master of the seventh peak of the Xuanjian sect. Qin Meridian believes that her attractive appearance and her personal charm are more than enough arguments for Chu Jiankyu to decide to become her disciple, and she doesn't hide her conviction, speaking in an uninhibited and vain way. After listening to all these arguments and suggestions, Zuo Q, with a satisfied smile, raises his hand for everyone to be silent and, with a tone of authority, states that that's enough discussion. He announces that, in his opinion, a disciple with such a unique and rare talent as Chu Jiankyu should join the first peak of the Xuanjian sect. In a very emphatic way, he explains that, by a fortunate coincidence, the master of the first peak is currently without a personal disciple, which makes this a perfect opportunity. This decision surprises everyone present, because the choice of the first peak as the destination for Chu Jiankyu raises the importance of his arrival even more, showing that he will be trained by the most respected master of all. At this, Master Xing Yuanqing calls out to brother Zuo Qiu and asks where his face is, as he has no shame in saying that, and says that he already has more than a dozen personal disciples under his first peak, and asks if he still has the courage to fight with them about it. And at this, the old man replies, coughing, asking if they think about calling the boy and letting him choose for himself. At this, a boy who was being a little reluctant to speak because he didn't know what to expect from the reactions, said that according to reports, the sect master who had suggested that the boy choose on his own, Chu Jiankyu, was already engaged to the fourth master of the peak, leaving the other masters completely shocked by the news, and Master Qi remained silent, just listening to them arguing while she sipped her tea. After all, everything was already guaranteed for her. And then, Master Tang replies that it's not to be expected that their fourth junior sister has been so silent today, and he thought she had a sudden change of heart, but it turns out that she's already secured the peach for herself. And then, quite seriously, she tells her third elder brother that he seems to be a little disappointed, and then she asks him what he thinks of them settling this with a fight. And then the third peak master thinks that in the Xuanjian sect, when it comes to combat strength, apart from senior brother Zuo Qiu and sixth peak master son Yuanbai, no one can defeat Qi Yanyan. And then the scene changes to outside, where the weather was closing in, warning that there was a big storm to come, and then the peak masters quickly go out to check it out, and the first master comments that something seems to be happening with the fourth peak.